Strap on your tinfoil hats, buckle down tight, and hold on loosely as we are broadcasting tonight from the South Mountain in hot and smoldering Phoenix, Arizona. I'm your host, TessaTNT. Thank you guys so much for joining us tonight live on Spreaker.com. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, Spotify, iTunes, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Castbox, Tumblr, Deezer, as well as Podcast Addict. So tonight I have a treat for all my guys and gals out there. Tonight we will be talking to and getting to know Mr. Stephen Edward. And Stephen is a native of San Antonio that upon graduating from Judson High School immediately joined the United States Air Force. He ended his career as an instructor, flight engineer, and weapons and tactics manager on the MC-130 Combat Shadow aircraft with 81 combat missions. It was here that he ran into his first three encounters with unusual and unknown aerospace vehicles. After the military, he did 10 more years as a defense contractor with special operations in various garden spots around the world. In the past few years, he called it quits and returned back to the United States with a total of 5,000 hours flight time. He now resides in San Antonio, acting as the director and coordinator and researcher and investigator for the Mutual UFO Network. Hey, Stephen, welcome to the show, and thanks so much for being here tonight.
Thank you for having me, Tessa.
So can you, no worries. Yeah, I was like, oh no, we're quiet again. So can you tell us a little bit about your history as a kid? Did you have any UFO or paranormal experiences, or was that later on in life?
Most of the experiences were later on in life. As a kid, it was pretty quiet, pretty normal, like every other kid.
Very good. And then you joined the military. I think you were saying that you were in there for 20 or more years.
Yeah, I just did the 20. As soon as I hit 20, I had enough of the bureaucracy, and it was time to go. Bigger and better things.
Indeed. I was in the military for a short amount of time. But yeah, there was no way I was cut out to be a lifer, but there are people out there that love it, and kudos to them, and thank them. And I thank you for your service.
Well, thank you very much. And certainly God bless those guys that do the full 30.
Indeed. Holy shnikes. I couldn't even imagine.
That is dedication.
So, when you had your first experience, you were in the military?
Yes, I was still a basic flight engineer, and I was at Dyess Air Force Base. We just finished doing some work with the Navy SEALs at Norfolk. On our way back to Abilene, Texas, Dyess, we encountered an object in the clouds, and it came screaming down off the nose of the aircraft, lit up the sky. And at first, we thought it was potentially a meteor or something like that, but it remained lit the entire time. And normally, your meteors are going to burn out fairly quickly. This thing burned all the way and down. And so at that point, we thought, okay, it's either a meteor or it's something else. But everybody was pretty much in agreement it was something else at that time. We got back, and within a couple of days, a buddy of mine and I started checking the NASA charts and other infographics that they would have on their website. And it was pretty clear that nothing was expected inbound that particular evening. So at that point, we realized, okay, yeah, that was a UFO. At the end of that flight, that particular night, on our way on the ramp or tarmac and coming back to the base itself, I had a discussion with the aircraft commander. Hey, are we going to file the reports on this? Because I do know that we have the documentation that we're supposed to file whenever something like this happens. And he made it very clear that this is not something that we do. And I was taught in the academy that if we file these things, we lose our careers. We're not going to be flying anymore. And so that was the beginning of 3 encounters, and with the same result at the end. We will not file reports. Our careers will be over.
So is that pretty general as far as the military goes? They, do you think it's because they want to cover it up, or they have other intentions? What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's 2 different things. One, it's pretty clear to us now that there is a program out there where they understand that there is a phenomena. They understand that and it should be very obvious now that it's actually out in the open and they've admitted to it. But back then, the thought process was, okay, it's one of 2 things. It's somebody out there, and we're still trying to wrap our heads around what's going on. And they certainly don't want our adversaries to know anything about what we know. And then 2, It could be, okay, yeah, we may have some toys out there and they don't want us filing these reports because, again, our adversaries may find out we do have special aircraft that's not in the known inventory. And so there was always a concern about that information getting out.
So with the first sighting, was there a tail behind it, like you said, as a comet or asteroid would do?
No,
Did it have
no,
a tail?
no, not that we could tell. It was just a really bright light. It lit up everything, and it was right off the nose of the aircraft. It was like they were playing with us, but they made it very clear to us that they were there.
What color was it?
White.
Oh, wow.
Typically with a lot of the meteors, you're going to have like a yellow, an orange, maybe a blue or a green. This was just a blazing white as this thing came through. And it didn't go as fast as a meteor would. It was a lot slower. And that was the other clue that we weren't dealing with a meteor.
So your second sighting, was it similar to the first?
Nope, it was distinctly different. And that second one would be on another mission with the SEALs. We had gone into Kenya to pick up some folks. We were operating in Saudi Arabia. We got a last minute tasker to fly down to Kenya, pick some guys up. We dropped them off in Cairo. They jumped on their plane and took off. And then the next night, we left Cairo to fly back into Saudi airspace. And as we crossed the threshold or the land into Saudi airspace, we saw a vehicle off to our right, a couple thousand feet above us. We were at 25,000 feet. These guys were stationary at approximately 27,000 feet, and they were shining. What got our attention was they weren't moving. We could tell that they weren't really going in any direction, and they were shining a very, very bright, large spotlight down below, and that's not normal for anything that we know of that's up there. We called ATC to find out if who else was out there besides us, because normally there wouldn't be anybody else out there that late at that time other than maybe a military asset. And they remarked nobody else was out there besides us.
And what exactly does ATC stand for?
Air traffic control.
Nice. That's insane. And you were saying before when you guys had this sighting, you guys checked out NASA and all these different outlets to figure out, was this actually a UFO or was this something else? And today there's so many apps out there. You can just pull it up, see when the satellites going by or other random things to find a conclusion as to what these things are.
Yes, there's quite a few that are out there right now. Stellarium, just off the top of my head, there's one that Skylink does. So if you just go to like the SpaceX website, and then it'll have a link to their Skylink, and it will show you whenever their assets will be flying overhead. But there's a lot of tools out there now. As a matter of fact, if you go to the Houston page, MUFON Houston, under Facebook, they've got their link to their main page, their .com. And under it, there's a whole bunch of links for different tools that you can use to analyze video, to look at which satellite was overhead at that time, which particular star system was in that area that you were looking at. Because many people get confused with some of the larger, brighter stars, such as Venus or Antares or even Sirius.
Yeah, Mars has actually been really bright lately too. My mom is like, "What is that?" Mom, that's Mars.
There's been a lot of that between the planetary systems such as Venus or Mars, or the Skylink satellites coming overhead. I mean, that's really got people into tizzy. A lot of our reports are coming in. SpaceX has changed the way the satellites are being, I guess, created or put together, and then how they rotate. So we're going to see a lot less of the white reflectivity that's coming off of them as they pass overhead. We're going to see less of the train. It may be for a day or two, but then they're going to rotate the satellites, and that way it's not going to obscure the vision from the people planet side.
That's awesome. One of our listeners was telling us about a sighting that she believed to be the SpaceX satellites, and she said they were all basically in a group sort of
Yes,
formation, one
they're
after
like
the
a
other.
train. Yep,
Interesting.
but a lot of people have seen them now.
Yeah, I haven't seen them yet, but it sounds really intriguing. It'd probably blow my mind the first time I saw it had I not known.
Yeah, all you got to do is just type it in, tell them where you're at, and then they will tell you when the next best likelihood of seeing it when it comes by.
And you had mentioned with these two sightings that each of these sightings you guys were working with the Navy SEALs.
The first two, yes. That was probably just coincidental. The third sighting, I was actually doing a resupply mission in Bosnia-Herzegovina. It was a airfield area that we had. We were based out of called Tuzla. And so we had flown into there. We had a thunderstorm that was behind us that we had passed. I forgot what country that was as we were coming into this particular area. And we did whatever we were doing. We turned back around and came back out. On the way back out, that thunderstorm was bigger. And I noticed that there was a small white orb literally dancing at high speed, high G maneuvers around that thunderstorm. Again, the conversation on the flight deck was, hey guys, do you see that? Yeah, what is it? We have no idea. Well, it's clear we know what it is. And they're like, yep. And so we going to talk about it? And they're like, nope.
We're not going to talk about it. No reports. You didn't see nothing.
Exactly.
So do you guys receive any sort of threats? My grandpa, on my stepmom's side, was in the Air Force, and I guess for the longest time he didn't share certain stories with his family that he had experienced. But later on in
That
life, the fear subsided, and he did share those stories.
there was a change back in the 50s, 60s, even the 70s. You were basically threatened, and these guys didn't play around. If you saw things or knew things that you weren't supposed to know or they didn't want you to know, they would pay you a visit, and they would basically threaten your life. And in some cases, people did pay with their lives. When you would have these people that would make these breakthroughs and knowing about UFOs, what we have, or whatever, they would tell them, hey, you need to stop. You've gone too far down the rabbit hole, ixnay. And then these guys would persist in the search for the truth, and then they would wind up having been suicided or having accidents. These days, they don't seem to care as much. They still protect the information, whatever it is that they're protecting, but there's no longer the threat of death. I don't think people are able to go that far anymore.
Yeah, and there's a lot of people sharing all kinds of information. It's really hard to keep it quiet these days, I would assume, as opposed to back in the day when people aren't as connected. We didn't have the internet and such back then.
Right.
So, what do you think the reason is that they don't want to share this information, that they do want to keep it hidden?
Technology, knowledge is power. At the end of the day, it's about information dominance. So when they control the information, then they control everything. It also makes it much harder for the adversaries to know what we have. And so they can't develop countermeasures or even figure out, okay, we know they have a program now. Now we know what we need to be spying for. So if they don't know what to look for, then they don't look for it, period. If you don't know it exists, then you don't know what you're looking for, period. So that was probably the main thing. But they've got the information, and they have to realize, okay, how much of this information can we release at one time without being too far ahead of our adversaries? And so there has to be this game of, okay, they're at this point, we need to be at this point. It's time to release a little bit more. So there's been that drip of information to always keep us ahead of our adversaries. Now there's the public, 1, 2 to 5 years, but then there's the non-public information that at one level it could be at 5 to 10 years ahead. And then at maybe another level, even darker, blacker level, and we're talking maybe 25 to even 50 years ahead of where the adversaries are at.
That's amazing. And there's been rumors when Eisenhower was in office that he had signed a treaty with the aliens, will allow you to do so many abductions
That's right.
if you trade information as far as technology and such with us. Is this true?
Yeah, it was about 1953. A lot of guys are going to argue over the dates, how many times they met, where they met. But the general consensus is there was a meeting. There was an agreement that took place. For the sake of argument, we're going to say it was at least one. It was around 1953. The most consistent location I hear was, I believe, Palm Springs. And so they met, they had a meeting with, referred to as maybe the tall whites of the Nordics. I believe it was the Nordics. And so the agreement was in place that they would abduct so many people per year, and that out of the people they abducted, no harm would come to the people, and that they wouldn't be allowed to remember what happened to them, so there wouldn't be that trauma and the problems that would occur back planet side if they had remembered what would go on. So again, those memories were suppressed. That was part of the deal. They would be returned fairly quickly. They wouldn't be kept for very long. The initial abduction would be anywhere from 2 to 3 hours as they began to figure out the baseline of your body and what they were dealing with. And then subsequent abductions were typically in a range of about 20 minutes. In return, We were promised access to exotic propulsion, exotic metals, and other technologies, medical technologies. So that was what we were given. In fact, there was a NASA scientist that recently came forward and did a video that was on YouTube not long ago. And he had basically said that he was actually assigned a Nordic woman who would work with him and help guide him through the process of creating the technology needed for our guys to go from Earth to the moon safely and back again. And so whenever he would come into a problem and he couldn't figure out what he needed to solve, he would go to her. And instead of giving him the direct answer, she would use riddles or jokes or whatever to help guide him to that answer. And then he would go back to his office and continue working with that newfound information. So they were trying to help us learn as we go instead of just giving us the information in some cases.
Yeah, it's amazing how far we've come technologically within the last 100 years. It's really mind blowing, and that really is the only explanation. I'm sorry, I can't talk. Explanation that I can find that is reasonable. I want to say rational, but um,
Well, if you look at certain technologies, I'm going to back it up a little bit. Back when I was in high school, I was in junior RTC, and we had a very good instructor. His name was Colonel Hull, and he showed us a lot of videos that were given to us by like DARPA, by NASA, and other organizations that would explain what the timeline was and where we needed to be as far as our activities in space or other technologies on the planet. And I noticed very quickly that we weren't keeping up with the timeline after I got out of high school. And I thought maybe it was misconstrued or maybe misrepresented. But then I found some documents by my boss, Ken Jordan, who is now the Texas State Director. And the document that I saw showed the original timeline. So, yeah, we are definitely behind. We're looking at about 20 years behind right now.
wow.
But that said, if you look at known aircraft airframes and the engine technologies known, and medical technologies known, we should be a lot further ahead than we are right now. Now, if you look at computing technology, we are way ahead. So some of the arguments would be, well, if we get more computing technology, then the rest of that technology will fall in line. Well, it still hasn't yet. So the question is, okay, why aren't we on a level playing field? And two, why aren't we following the Defense Industrial Complex plan that they put out so many years ago? Because they're very good about staying on their plan. And that's when we learned, well, they did stay with the plan. They just didn't tell us about it.
Yeah, they're not sharing yet.
Right. Just it's very slow when they let the information out. But that's all about to change. And that's part of the reason why we're going through a more robust disclosure process right now. And we are what I call a midpoint of a transition in the release of this information from what I would call a soft release or soft disclosure to a more hard disclosure. And we're building to that right now.
Do you think a lot of these shows on the air, like Ancient Aliens and other shows about Project Blue Book, so on and so forth, are put out there for us to gain the knowledge as well as being more readily able to wrap our minds around it for
Yes,
this
that's
hard
yep.
disclosure?
Yes, absolutely. That's what it's there for. Because they're getting help. When these guys speak and the things that they're talking about from the different groups and different channels, they're clearly being given information. Somebody's dropping them hints. They're dropping them breadcrumbs to keep these things going and to keep that educational process going. Because you can't go from 0 to 60 automatically. It isn't going to work that way, especially with the American population or the human population in general. You're just going to freak people out. You're going to break them out of their paradigm way too quickly, and you're going to have a lot of dysfunction. Things are just going to stop working, and they can't have that. And so the idea is to slowly bring them out, but use these media as that method to get these people out of their shell, so to speak, their technological shell, to make them aware of the technologies that are out there. And, oh, by the way, we got these technologies from these little gray guys.
Yeah, some people would laugh, some people would call you crazy, but fact to me is indeed stranger than fiction. Okay, so going back to the aliens and the whole exchange of humans for technology, what exactly do you think the aliens want with us?
There's a lot of argument on that one. We've got people in different quarters with different ideas on it. Nobody can seem to agree. I guess the most general again, consensus with the UFO community is that people are being used for some sort of DNA or breeding program. Some of them refer to the Earth as a kind of a zoo, a very special zoo, for that matter. And so they're on a very active campaign, the different alien species out there, to collect the DNA from the different animals, to include ourselves, not to mention many of us, in order to build their more robust library. In addition to that, there is the breeding aspect. There's a lot of alien species out there now that can't seem to reproduce in what we would consider the normal sense, and they're also kind of an evolutionary dead end. So they're relying upon our DNA to allow them to continue reproducing their species and maybe change the way they're developing so that they can be a normal functioning species again instead of dying out.
Yeah, a friend of mine had told me about his abduction experience, and that uh, these certain aliens have come to a certain point where their body has, like you said, gone to the point where they can no longer reproduce. And there's
Right.
a lot of other things going on with that. And he said that's the reason he thinks that this is happening. But on the other hand, there's many different species of aliens from what I've heard. How many species are you aware of that are out there?
If we're looking at the American numbers, I think we've got it pegged at about 30 some odd species, anywhere from 32 to 36. But the Russians put out a book not that long ago, which had easily double, if not triple, that number. But we'll just go with the American book for now, when we're looking at about 32 some odd species, 32, 36, somewhere in that range. The typical ones that people are familiar with are the mantids, the grays, the tall grays, the short grays. You've got the Nordics, the tall whites. You've got the Lyrans. Those are some of your more common species that people have a tendency to run into whenever they get abducted or have ground encounters. And some of them are a little more bizarre.
Can you tell us about them?
Some of them are kind of a blue bird looking thing. Others are these weird orange triangles or pyramids. I'm not quite sure. They're definitely a non-conventional life form. Those are probably two of the more bizarre ones I've heard of. As a matter of fact, Dr. Stephen Greer talks about the orange ones, and he had I guess, a calling, if you will. They were on a campfire, and this orange thing showed up, and so that appears to be one of the ones, or one of the older species that he and his team has been working with. When he started dealing with the other guys through Gaia, Timothy Good or Corey Good, and the other guy, they're dealing with like blue avians. Those are the blue bird humanoid-looking creatures. So they're the ones that they claim to be working with from time to time. And again, that's when you're dealing with the ones that definitely don't look like us. The ones that look more like us, that could literally pass by us on the street, we might not even notice it, would be the tall whites or the Nordics. In fact, our planet's considered a kind of a tourist destination. So not only do they go there for science tourism, these creatures, the different species, will even go to places like Vegas. They know they can go to like LA or Vegas and blend in with the weird crowd and do whatever they want. And because things are different in those areas, no one's going to really notice or pay attention or even care that this person looks a little different. And that's why they enjoy going to those locations. But Vegas seems to be their favorite for some reason.
Maybe it's because it's so lively and somewhat like a city that doesn't sleep. I don't know.
Again, people in those areas are there's a lot of unusual characters that go in through there. And so if there's already a lot of unusual people and you show up and you're a little bit on the odd side, again, no one's going to think twice about it. As long as you're there to spend money on the tables, they don't care. They just want your money.
So are aliens into money, like as far as being able to use it and be here like we are, as far as the use of money, or are there others that really could care less? How exactly does that work?
My best guess is most of them don't need our cash. They're engaging in other stuff. If they're working with their government, they're probably, I've been hearing that they're trading assets, or what they would consider junk. For us would be considered advanced technology. And so they drop off their junk. We get it. We reverse engineer it and make something out of it, or even make it better than what they had it. So that's something I've been hearing about a lot, where again, we get their junk and we made it better. So there's a respect that they apparently have for us because of our ingenuity as humans. When it comes to the specific money part, that would be the guys that look like us and that want to intermingle in our society. They are going to have a need for money. They are going to need certain things in order to to function here on this planet, whether they're here for a short period of time or for a long period of time. And so money is going to be needed. Where they're getting it, not really sure, unless it's part of the deals that they've had with the government, or they do magic tricks, if you will, and get their hands on large sums of money. Let's just say I had knowledge of the future. I could be a Nordic or a tall gray, and I could go to somebody and say, hey, you need to put your money down on this. That individual makes $1 billion or, whatever, and says, okay. And part of the agreement would be you give us 10% of what you get, and now they've got operating capital. If they've been around a long time, they've already gotten themselves into the system maybe hundreds of years ago, and then they've got something going on the side that, again, we're not even aware of through, banking secrecy laws. So there's no telling how they've done it, but there's different ways you can do it.
Yeah, and there's a dirty rumor that money's going to go away and basically we'll just have cards or chips or whatnot implanted into us. And I really didn't believe that until the whole coinage thing. You have to have exact change because we don't have coinage. Is there a shortage of money? Are they phasing it out? It's
They're
really
phasing
hard
it
to
out.
say. Yeah.
Yeah, the coin shortage is BS. They've come up with some great excuses for it, but talking with folks months back, it was very clear from the conversations with actual bankers, and I'd asked a question, and other people had asked the same question of some of the top banks. How far away are we from going to an all digital or cashless society? And the response was very quick, and it was, we could literally flip the switch and it would be done overnight. All they're waiting for was that call from the head guy to flip the switch and it would be done automatically. And anything you had that was cash based would be worthless. And you would be told you need to come into the bank and drop it off. And so those credits would be put into your account and you would no longer have that cash money or those coins. And it's become very clear that that's the direction they're headed right now. When the COVID thing came out, I was getting privy to some conversations that were taking in the financial sectors on the global scale. And these guys were already talking before before people in the States were even talking about COVID. And these guys abroad were already navigating on how they were going to introduce the cashless society and using COVID as the way to do that. And hence we have the coin problem. And there's a lot of places now, and fewer and fewer places are taking cash. You're having to use your plastic. And so plastic is going to be your version 1. But because of security issues that are going to start happening in the future, we're going to have to evolve beyond that.
Yeah, and even pre-COVID, I heard of certain towns or cities that were trying to do this, and it was a real issue for the homeless population. And that's where I see difficulty. Like, how are people supposed to be able to donate money to these people? How is that supposed to work? How are they supposed to go in and buy food?
At some point, in that case, they're either going to be forced to go into government or corporate sponsored shelters, which is really what a lot of these governments want. Some of these larger cities will actually punish you or fine you if you provide food or cash to homeless people, because they're trying to force them all into these one size fits all shelters so they can adequately track that population and do whatever else they think they're going to do with them. I'm not even going to get into that discussion. That said, if you're a homeless person, the way around that is tell people, hey, just give me a Walmart card, buy drugs with a Walmart. But again, you got those Visa cards or whatever. And if the account is set up on that particular card, then you could say, hey, if you could Venmo me money, it could go to this account or whatever applications are out there. People could transfer that money. As a matter of fact, there was somebody that was talking with a beggar on the street for this very issue. And the guy was like, yeah, we don't have cash. And the guy was like, yeah, well, I've got Venmo. So you send me the money that way.
Right?
So some of the more tech savvy beggars that are out there are aware of what's coming, and they're taking steps to stay ahead of it. But there's going to be a point where they're going to have to register. They won't be able to stay off grid if they're going to continue engaging in the lifestyle that they're in right now.
For sure. So going back to aliens, I've heard different things about the pyramids. A lot of people believe they were built by slaves. But as far as the pristine cuts and measurements and angles, so on and so forth, it seems like there was other technology that was not available at that time that was used to cut this stone. Um, have you gained any information about this time in human history and any evidence that aliens were involved?
We're looking at two scenarios or potentially three scenarios, but right now I'm just going to focus on two. One, there were other human or human-like civilizations in the past that had technologies that have been lost that allowed them to build these structures, because I'm looking at these structures all over the world, and I'm just not buying the whole thing that man did it. It just isn't working for me. When you look at the intricate patterns and the way this architecture was put together, it doesn't, and you look at how we lived in those days, it just doesn't make any sense. So there had to be something else going on at that time. Again, we could be looking at an older culture that had that technology, and that technology was lost, and that's why we can't fill in that gap. Or we're looking at external species, maybe some alien visitors. In the case of, say, the Sumerians or the Anunnaki, and they brought in their technology to do these things. When you're looking at some of the places in South America where the stones are fused together so perfectly and they look like they've been melted together, clearly there's a technology at play that we don't have. And we've talked to engineers, and not just myself and others, but even other shows or other groups have talked to these engineers that are involved in construction and civil engineering. And they've said, we don't have the capability of doing what those guys did. So clearly there was something else going on, and we just don't know what it was. So the whole thing with, slave labor and rollers and logs and ropes and stuff, not buying it.
No.
That might work in some instances, maybe even Easter Island, but for a lot of the other stuff out there, those big grand structures, not buying it. There's something else going on.
Yeah, and you also look at their different carvings and different man beasts that seem to exist, like part
Yes.
person, part bird, or part person, part lion. It's pretty intriguing. Is this part of
Yes.
their genetic experiments?
Right. If you look at the Sumerian writings, and again, some folks are going to argue about how accurate those writings or interpretations are. But if you look at those, and if you also compare them with a lot of the others, the Greek lore, the Roman mythos, you're going to see that there was definitely something going on back in those days. There were hybrid programs where they would experiment with humanoidal DNA with these creatures to see what they could come up with. Hence why we have all these bizarre creatures in all the different cultures, the bird heads, the dog heads, the cat heads. And people have talked about some of those creatures in the not too distant past. So if you've got a consistent type of creature persisting in different cultures at similar time frames, then there's probably something to it. It just doesn't magically happen at all those cultures around the world at the same time. So yeah, there's something out there. There was definitely a program going on where they would work with DNA to see what they could come up with.
It's very interesting how they turn out. To me, I think the human-headed lion thing would freak me out more than the person with the bird head. I don't know why. A lion running around with a human head, I think that would freak me out the most.
It'll be a little harder to chomp you.
Right. But it's kind of just
Versus,
a
yeah.
look. But it's intriguing as well, like the different things that do wash up from our ocean, things that aren't seafaring animals that supposedly come from these certain islands. I'm wondering, is this humans using alien technology as far as genetics, or is this just humans being humans creating certain things as well?
Are we talking like Montauk Island, that creature that was washed up out there?
Yeah, it's like a griffin looking critter.
Yeah, there's some bizarre looking creature that washed up on a beach near Montauk Island, which they refer to as the Montauk Monster or something like that. It's quite possible there could be some genetic manipulation going on in government labs. I would be shocked if we hadn't been engaging in that type of activity, because clearly the other groups out there, I know the Germans have been busy working and dabbling with stuff. The Chinese have been doing it. The Koreans have clearly been doing it. So if these other folks are out there doing it, then we would be fools from a defense perspective of not doing it ourselves to at least be ahead or be prepared technology-wise in order to maybe counter anything that they might come up with. That said, again, with the alien programs, if they're out there creating things, and I think the hybrid with the animals, they may have stopped or at least doing it on the planet, and they're more focused just working with the human stock with what they're doing. Again, in the past, they were probably working with the animals, but now they seem to be focused on us. Are there still creatures out there that we're not aware of? Our own scientists have said that, yeah, there's probably a lot of species that we have not discovered yet, and we're still discovering many new species. Every week you hear about something that's been discovered. You've got your bizarre creatures that live in the deep of the ocean, and from time to time you'll see that pop up. But because of atmospheric differences for what we have up here and what they have down in those depths, those creatures don't seem to last very long whenever they come up. So unless they tag them and bag them quickly, those things biodegrade very quickly.
Wow. Maybe the air hitting them or whatnot, causing it to break down.
Yeah, they do seem to be decomposing very fast when they come up. And so by the time we do seem to find these things washed up on the beach, they're already in a pretty bad state. It could be just a simple matter of as they're rising up to the depths from, I guess, where they presumably died at and made it up, there could be that process along the way. And so they're already partially decomposed by the time they get on shore, which only speeds up once they get on shore with all the critters that are on the shore, like crabs.
Wow. Yeah, it's insane. And you hear about these different creatures in the paranormal field as far as skinwalkers, dogmen, so on and so forth.
Right.
In recent years, people have not only been talking about dogman, but talking about, and it reminds me of going back to Egypt again, um, the human body, dog head. They're actually wearing some sort of armor, carrying spears. And there's groups of them, like in the desert or different places like this, that people have noticed them. And it makes me wonder, okay, so is this alien genetics at work? Is this the government doing this? Or could there actually be some sort of portal that they're coming through? Or is there a flash between worlds? It's pretty
Um,
interesting.
I'm going to start off with Genesis. In Genesis, we have the issue with Cain and Abel, and Cain basically got kicked out after he had slain Abel. And he basically made a reference in Genesis about the others that were out there. So in the very beginning of the Bible, they make it very clear that there's other creatures, other humanoidal creatures out there besides us, and not just the Homo sapiens as we see ourselves today. There were other creatures out there. Could this be a reference to what we may refer to as elves and gnomes and dwarves and giants and maybe the Nephilim type creatures? It could very well be. Could the Dogmen essentially be a tribe of space-faring creatures that ended up on the Earth and decided to make this place home? That could be the case as well. Could they be a result of genetic experimentation by the aliens, and a new species was created of dogmen? I have heard recent stories of the dogmen tribes or groups existing on the Earth, and that they could still theoretically be on the Earth. The stories of them haven't gone very far back, meaning they could easily still be around. Of course, the best place to hide would be in the deserts because not a lot goes on out there. Now, when you're talking about the skinwalkers, that's probably a different phenomena
Hmm.
where we're dealing with the paranormal. I personally prefer to keep the paranormal side. We talking about spiritual and demonic activity or witchcraft separate from the UFO lore, because the UFO stuff is definitely taking off in a more defined direction, and and you're getting actual support from the U.S. government on that, versus the paranormal. That same level of support and I guess you could say information is not quite there yet. Um, but that said, I believe the Skinwalker guys fall into a different category.
Hmm.
Uh, Now there is one thing that we're starting to see some cooperation on. The Bigfoot at one point in time was considered a cryptid or in the paranormal category, and as we've been discussing with our brothers in the Bigfoot world, it's becoming more and more obvious that there is a connection between the UFOs and the Bigfoot, and so I expect to see some papers coming out and some cooperative efforts between the UFO community and the Bigfoot community to understand how those two tie together more clearly. At the end of the day, I think it's all going to tie together. But for now, the UFO community is at the forefront when it comes to hard science. And I think the Bigfoots are going to be right behind them. Yeah, it's just a matter of time. It's going to come out.
Yeah, I've heard different theories of Bigfoot. Bigfoot's in league with fairies. Bigfoot's being sighted going onto or being sucked up into spacecraft, or how they're so elusive and you look behind the tree you think they were hiding behind and they're gone. Or some people have said they just, evaporate into nothing, like you can't find them any longer. They just disappeared. So a lot of
Um,
people have been stating that this could be alien or it could be in league with the aliens. So it's hard to understand what exactly they are. So you're saying that there could be a
They're,
paper coming out talking about how they're in league with the aliens, or they could be aliens themselves.
um, they could be aliens themselves. They could be something that existed on Earth or that was created as another species on the Earth, like us. Or if you go with the theory that they created us, there's also talk that they could be from another planet, and they're kind of like, I guess, pets or in a cooperative effort with the aliens, because there is a lot of reporting where a portal will open up or a ship will land, and these things will step out, hop off, and they go around and do the caveman thing for a while, and then when it's time to go, then the ships fly back. They get picked up at a pre-designated point at a pre-designated time, and off they go again. These creatures are definitely intelligent. So we just had a meeting a week ago, and I'm trying to get the video so I can put it up on YouTube for everybody to see. And the discussion that we had, it was a very, very well done, fantastic discussion with the Bigfoot, cryptozoologist guy, and there's a lot more. These creatures are actually very, very intelligent. They're masters of the hide and seek game.
Hmm.
So they realized that when they were thinking they were the ones hunting the Bigfoot was actually stalking them the entire time. And it's just, it wasn't one time. It was pretty much every time they went out in the field, the Bigfoot knew they were out there. And so that definitely shows a level of intelligence. And then whenever they would turn around, they would never actually see the creature. But then when they go back and analyze their film, they could see where it looked like it was hiding in different, the way the trees were set up or the bushes. But they could see bits and pieces of their face in those images. And so they realized the damn things were stalking us the entire time. These creatures will be stalking you long before you realize that they are, if you're out in that area in their environment. And so if you put up a game cam, they already know what the game cams are. They're not fools. So these, again, which belies the fact that these guys really have a lot of intelligence.
Hmm.
So they see the game cams, and we believe they can also see in that light spectrum of the emitters coming off those game cameras. So they know what those things are, and they stay away from them. That's why you're not picking them up on the game cameras. And so my remark to the guy was, well, why don't you use your GoPros instead of having a GoPro 4 like you're doing? Because as soon as you turn, those things can see you turn, and they immediately go into hiding. And they're just far enough back, it's easy for them just to step out of the way, where they just don't move, and you don't see them. It doesn't pick up. If you put the game cameras, or not the game cameras, the GoPros on the back of your helmets or your hats, but you disguise them so they can't be seen with the fabric or whatever that you have wrapped around your helmets, they're not going to know that you're looking at them, but the cameras are looking back. And so when they start stalking you and moving, you will catch them on the camera. And so that's one of the ideas that I shared with them, and that's just using my experience from my military past. And there's some other things we discussed by gas analyzation. You get your sample as soon as you get to that area that you're at. You sample the gas with a gas analyzer, or you just take the sample for that matter. And then once you know you're being followed, then you backtrack to the area that you're pretty sure he was at when he was following you, and you take another gas sample. And because the lore is that these creatures emit some foul-smelling smells. A lot of it's like sulfur or rotting meat or rotting carcass type smells. And so if you're going to have that, that means there's more of a different type of chemical in the air or a compound. So if you get that sample, when you can smell it, now you've got the two that you can compare from that same area. And now you can show that, yes, there is a change in the gases or the compounds in the air. There's proof that, okay, there was something there. And especially if you start seeing more of the organic compounds, you'll have that proof that there was a creature there. And it went further than that. With the Bigfoot, you can, and there's been a lot of things. If you just go to YouTube, just looking at YouTube videos, there is a lot out there now about people's interactions with the Bigfoots. Some not so good, some pretty scary, and some that are more on the positive side. And so there could be good ones and bad ones, or just what would be considered bad is their perception of our hostile intention. They do clearly have a fear of us, and probably for good reason. Apparently, our pioneers in the old days would hunt these things. And I've seen some images of what appears to be a Bigfoot-type creature that had been shot and killed by our pioneers in the past. So, of course, there's a natural fear on their part of us. But that said, there's places where there'll be a clearing, a big pasture area where the Bigfoot creatures can hide in the tree line, and there'll be like a stump. And the people have gotten to the habit of placing non-edible items onto the stump, because unless you've got a routine established, and if you put fruit out there, there's a good chance the raccoons or other critters are going to eat that before the Bigfoot gets a chance at getting into it. But if you've established a routine and a pattern, then they will be able to get it before the creatures will. You just have to get away from there and give them a chance to feel safe and comfortable to go out there and get it themselves. Why they haven't considered putting up cameras to capture that interaction, I don't know. Or maybe they just haven't released that information yet. But that said, you go out there, and if you leave like marbles or the glass beads, the cheap jewelry that looks really flashy, if you leave it there for them, you'll come back the next day, your jewelry that you left will be gone, and they will leave for you intricately woven out of grass or whatever, like bracelets or necklaces that they will have made with their own hands, and they've left it behind for you as a gift, an exchange, so to speak. So that is a thing.
It's very interesting.
So yes, I'm trying to work with my boss to start creating a cooperation with the Bigfoot community so that we can work together on an investigation, hopefully out in East Texas, where there seems to be a preponderance of sightings, so we can actually work with them and see what we can come up with using our brains and their brains, and maybe actually get something.
Very interesting. Has this group seen the connection with aliens and Bigfoot?
Yes. They're using some advanced technology. Some of that is like word pattern technology that they got from the Israelis. And so they took all of their sightings and they started introducing some UFO sightings that seem to coincide with Bigfoot sightings. And so they get the text of that conversation or that interview or whatever it was, and they plug it into the computer, and it started spitting out some very interesting images or patterns and word patterns. And the two biggest words were basically the Bigfoot and the UFO. So what that said is there was clearly a connection between the two. And there's a lot of medium-sized words, and the strength of the word is indicated by the size of the word in that screen or that pattern. But there's a lot of supporting words as well that feed into the fact that there is a correlation between Bigfoots and UFOs. So I saw enough to convince me that there's from his presentation and from what I've seen so far over the past few years, there's definitely a connection. There's no doubt in my mind.
That's awesome. And it could be a big reason why it's so difficult for people who have tried to test hairs and certain things like that genetically, and they never come back with anything that to me sounds very coherent. It always seems like there's something wrong with the sample, or it's showing both human and animal DNA, perhaps some things in there that they don't even recognize because they are alien. Do you think that our scientists have a record of these different alien species and their different genetic streams?
If we're talking the Smithsonian, they probably got their hands on the more definitive samples. They could easily, these guys have known throughout the years of going in and getting, say, giant bones. Are you familiar with that phenomena? Somebody will be doing a dig somewhere, whether it's getting ready for the construction of a building or whatever, and they find the giant bones, and then the Smithsonian rep will show up and go, "Oh yeah, we'll help you. We'll figure out if it's a giant or not." And then they call the Smithsonian representative back, a couple of weeks or a couple of months later, like, "Hey, whatever happened to my bones?" And the guy on the other end of the phone is like, "Who are you? What are you talking about?" And
What
these bones, exactly. And they're never seen again. And this story goes on and on and on. Our history, the old newspapers are replete with such occurrences taking place. So it was very clear to us in the cryptid and the other communities that the Smithsonian is behind, or a segment of the Smithsonian. Their job is to gather that crypto type stuff and make it disappear for whatever reason. I don't want to speculate on this particular show what that reason is, but there's clearly an agenda driving this. So if you've got a guy who's somehow made it public, or some of these big colleges know that if the government finds out we got our hands on, say, Bigfoot DNA or something unusual, we've already been given our orders that if we don't turn that over, or at least make them aware of it, we can lose our government funding. So what do you think the colleges are going to do?
Listen to the government?
Exactly. They don't want to lose that funding. That could be millions of dollars of grant money that they don't want to lose, or cooperative projects or access to technology. And so they're going to do that drug deal and say, okay, here's our stuff. You're going to give us some garbage back, monkey fur. And then so when the guy shows back up again to say, it's inconclusive, or it's this, whatever primate, a chimpanzee from Florida, here you go, here's your baggie back. And the guy's not going to know any different.
Yeah. Well, how
So
could
that leads
he?
to a lot of frustration.
Yeah, for sure. It's very frustrating, and it's funny. Before I even joined the military, I never trusted my government. And after joining the military, now I really, really, really don't trust my government. There's so many things that you learn and so many things that your eyes are open to. It's insane to me that they do play these games and they do these things. I don't know. I feel we have a right to know these things, and I know there are people out there that if they found out certain things would run around like a chicken with their head cut off. So I do
Yes.
understand why they don't tell us everything, but I mean, can we have a club where those of us that understand can know? That'd be nice.
That's going to come from us. At the end of the day, the government's not going to do it. They're not going to go out of their way I mean, other than helping foster certain types of shows on TV by dropping those breadcrumbs to those guys. Unless it comes from the people where you have more participation in my group, for example, MUFON, where you do have enough public support that we can start pressuring our politicians to get more headway. And again, the government, these guys that run these programs, they're watching what goes on. They're looking at the shows. They're looking at people's response to the shows. Did they enjoy it? Did they think it was interesting? Did they find out they want to learn more? How many people have joined MUFON? How much interest is there out there? When they see those numbers trend in the positive, then they go, okay, great. The American public is ready for more information, and they're going to start dropping more. And here's the deal. They took advantage of the whole COVID thing. And that's during COVID is when they announced, yeah, UFOs are real. And, oh, yeah, by the way, we've got a group out there studying them. And, oh, yeah, by the way, these ships, we've actually got a ship, and we think it was from off-world. And now they backtracked on it. I think Harry Reid got himself in trouble again. So if we see him beat up again, that means that he overstepped his bounds. And we believe that's what happened the last time. We think he crossed a line somewhere, and they beat the crap out of him when he had his home gym accident. We think somebody got mad at him and reminded him of his place. But it looks like he may have messed up and misspoke recently this past, I believe it was July, and said off-world vehicle when he meant to say unknown origin vehicle. And so there was a correction. And I think I have it on my channel, Team Brave New World, where I talk about that very particular issue when I go into the disclosure process. But again, it's going to come from us. It's going to come from the American public and the humanity in general say, hey, we want more. And it has to be genuine. And if they see that there's a genuine movement amongst the people that, hey, we are ready, we're not afraid anymore, show it to us. Hey, let's do it. Let's go forward. And that will embolden them to release more information. Now, they're still going to be cagey when it comes to technology. But as far as the existence of these things and the craft they fly and whatever, they may be more forthcoming. They might even start talking about the different species that are out there and what they know about the different species. But again, until we start pushing them as John Q. Public, it's going to be a slow process. But I think we've gotten to a point where that's going to speed up a little quicker, with the what would normally be stunning revelations in a normal time period. People are just like, whatever, because they're so wrapped up with the drama of COVID or the political drama that's taking place right now that they don't really care about the alien thing. And yeah, they're aware of it, it's in their cross check, but they're too busy about real world things that they don't care about the alien thing. Now, that doesn't mean that we're not going to have a Santa Claus effect. When you were growing up as a kid, your mom and dad told you about Santa Claus to keep you in line. And, you saw the cartoons about Santa Claus. And so, when you found out and you were old enough to realize that, hey, Santa Claus is a thing and I want to see him and I know he's in the mall and mom and dad's going to take me to the mall and he's excited. Same thing with that alien. I'm excited. I want to see that alien. I'm ready. And then when you actually get and see Santa Claus, what do half the kids do when they see him for the first time? They freak out.
Yeah.
They start bawling or they're like, no, I'm not going anywhere near that guy. He's creepy. I think the same thing is going to end up happening with the alien deal. But regardless, we're going to have to get down that path one way or another. I do see in my studies, and I wrote 5 essays on behalf of MUFON, and we're going to hopefully in the next year that information is going to get released to the public, whether through symposiums or TV shows or whatever, or maybe in interviews on the news channels. But the idea is a lot of us with degrees put out these papers. I did 5, and I was focusing more on the sociological aspects. Even though I'm more of a technical guy, I wanted to play with the sociological aspect, religion, or how would people react. And I discovered with doing some census type work through online portals and stuff that people are ready. But the ones, even the evangelicals, who are like, well, aliens are nothing but a bunch of demons, period, and that's it.
Mhm.
Their response was, well, as long as they're not doing anything, then we're not going to make an issue of it. But they're still demons. But there's still going to be that percentage, which is these guys are going to pull out their AR-15s and start shooting first and asking questions later without understanding what it is they're really dealing with, whether it was an alien or a demon. So that's the potential problem that I see is going to be that fringe side of Christianity or Islam or Judaism. Remember the fringe element, the radicalized element. That would be the biggest problem whenever we do have a visitation, because it's going to upset their paradigm.
Indeed. Well, on that note, Stephen, we do have to go to our first musical break. And on this break, we have Gravity from Krakow, Poland with Throw You Away, My Last Goodbye, and Take a Walk in My Shoes. You guys don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this musical break.
walk down the street, thinking all the things you said you need. Well, don't you tell me, baby, how do you feel? As I walk down the street, thinking all the things you said you need. Well, don't you tell me, baby, how do you feel? Don't you take a walk? Well, don't you take a walk? In my shoes, why don't you take a walk? Before you tell me what to do, well, don't you take a walk? Well, don't you take a walk? In my shoes, why don't you take a walk? Before you tell me what to do. No, it's easy, you tell me what to do. Have you ever stopped to think all the things that I've been through? No, it's easy, you tell me what to do. Have you ever stopped to think all the things that I've been through? Well, don't you take a walk? Well, don't you take a walk? In my shoes, well, don't you, baby, take a walk? Before you tell me what to do, well, don't you take a walk? Well, don't you take a walk? In my shoes, well, don't you, baby, take a walk? Before you tell me what to do.
Welcome back, and thanks so much for joining us tonight on We Are Paradox Media's Late Night in the Rockies. Tonight we're joined by Mr. Stephen Edwards. Stephen, welcome back, and thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Yes, thank you for again. Glad to be here.
So, a listener of ours had a question in the chat room, and he was wondering, do you think that we have recovered a ship in, I think it's Mahe, Brazil, earlier this year? Did you hear anything about that?
Okay, if that was at that big sighting buzz that took place where all these people were supposedly involved, everything we got and the official MUFON answer was through our representative in Brazil was that was all essentially a hoax. It was a very elaborate hoax. Just something had happened. People got spun up over it. Then people just started making things up, feeding on the hysteria for their own attention and getting their own 2 minutes of fame on TV. But we are not aware of anything actually having happened.
So what exactly did happen that freaked everyone out?
It was probably a meteor because that is an issue. There has been a significant increase in meteor activity over the past year, and it's actually gone back further than that. But the biggest increase has happened over the past year. With that, I expect, based on my scientist friends, that we're going to be seeing a lot more of an increase in activity to the point where people are probably going to start asking questions like, what's going on? What's really going on? But it is an issue. We suspect that in the case of Brazil, it wasn't a meteor that came in, which got their attention, and then everything just built into hysteria after that. As a matter of fact, there was a meteor storm or a meteor shower that rained down on a village in Brazil just a few weeks ago. It was mid-August, as a matter of fact. So, yeah, a month ago. Amazingly, it doesn't seem like anybody was actually hurt or killed or anything was really damaged. But the meteor debris littered that entire village area, and it actually was kind of focused around the church. And the type of meteor composition was what's referred to as a type of chondrite. And this particular type of chondrite, I believe there's 3 classes, was a very rare kind. And so these particular meteors were worth a lot of money. So for these villagers, I mean, they made out like bandits. They got paid well by meteor hunters, which is a thing. I met one today. Yeah, I got his card here. But for that village, that was a blessing. Now, that may not be the case. Some of the scientists are saying that a lot of the fires that have started in California and Oregon aren't just because of arsonists or whatever else, or lightning or a reveal party. They're saying there's just too many fires happening at the same times when these things kick off. Now, some have even theorized that DEW weapons, directed energy weapons, have been used. But the guys I work with are saying, yeah, those may have caused some of the fires, but we believe a preponderance of them, especially those along fault lines and volcanic areas, are actually caused by activity with the Earth and with the meteors that are starting to come in, because it isn't just California and Oregon that's having a problem. This is actually a global problem. Excuse me. Had a burger today and it's just killing me. But this problem with the fires is actually everywhere. It's a global problem right now. And even with California and Oregon, the amount of fires, the frequency, and the intensity is much higher than normal. And this is coming from actual scientists. This isn't just something that people are saying just to say it.
Yeah, it has been very interesting. And I've noticed it on the West Coast. I'm originally from Colorado, but like you said, it's everywhere, and the air is terrible. Even if you don't have smoke, you see the haze. There's different particles in the air. But it's interesting. So you're saying that some of these fires could be caused by meteors as well as directed
Geological
energy
activity.
weapons? That's interesting.
Yes, the guy's name is Dutch Sense. He was the one that first proposed that it might be a directed energy weapon, because some of the imagery he was looking at, I believe it was satellite feeds, was showing IR streaks across the screen, implying heat, energy, very focused, being directed at those areas where these fires were starting. Some other guys jumped onto it and were kind of saying the same thing. Dutch is considered very respected in his field, even though he's at odds with USGS. In this case, I'm thinking there might be a little bit of a reach, or the DEW weapons may not be as responsible for what they think. It could easily be something else, making them think a DEW weapon was being used. I'm more likely to side with my scientist friends to say that it was a influx of meteor activity in that area, which can easily cause fires. And of course, the geological processes that are taking place in that area, all up and down the entire West Coast, has become very geologically active over the past 2 or 3 years. If you start getting those ruptures, splits, and similar phenomena taking place, that energy, that heat energy, is going to come up. And that's a whole nother topic we could get into. We might even get into it if time permits. But as the Earth splits and does its thing, that heat energy comes up. And it doesn't take a lot of heat energy to set things on fire.
Yeah, I could imagine. And a lot of people have theorized that a lot of these fires, they believe, are being set because the West Coast, the government or our military wants to set up there. I mean, I don't know how many more bases they need over there, but
Uh,
a lot of people are
Five.
saying these certain areas, especially last year, I believe it was, certain areas that these fires um, were happening in, the government was coming in and buying off these properties so they could build like a military installation or something. Have you heard anything along these lines?
I've heard a little bit about that, but it's just not working for me, because if you know that area, if you're the government and you know that area is in trouble, that something catastrophic is going to happen, why would you want to waste billions of dollars on building secret bases in an area that you know is going to get destroyed in a future event anyway? That doesn't quite make sense. Now, I do know for a fact, working with a friend of mine that was involved in some activity up there, understanding what was taking place with those geological activities. And as a matter of fact, after 6 months, he was like, I'm out. He basically gave me a clue, and I followed that breadcrumb, and like, oh, okay, this is where they're putting a staging base. So when these things do happen in the future, they're getting ready for it. They've got the assets set up to be able to fly people in and out, and items like food and water in and out of that area. And this would be considered a safe area amongst the other areas that are considered danger zones. And so they are setting up there, but they're not burning people out of their homes to create bases. I just don't see that happening. If anything, they're going to be focusing their bases on more stable portions of the plate of the North American craton than on the edges, where they're more likely to actually lose that base.
So, do you believe that the aliens that are coming here are friendlies and they're looking out for our best interest, or do you think it's a mix, like some like us and are trying to protect us and others don't?
The word I'm getting from leadership is, and from the folks in the UFO community, is that there is a federation of planets, so to speak. I don't mean to piggyback on the whole Star Wars thing or Star Trek, but there is such a thing that's out there. I believe they refer to as the Galactic Council, and that's a group of entities that tries to go with to some degree the non-interference pact. But at the same time, they are trying to work with us because they know that we have problems, and that they're helping us get through these problems and evolve so we can become a useful member of the Galactic Council. Because we do apparently have some things that are unique to us as a species that they would like to be a part of. But in order for them to be able to do that with us, they need to help us grow. Are there bad aliens out there? Of course. There's always going to be opportunists in any society that you're at. Anywhere I've traveled around the planet, whatever the culture is, the country, the whatever, there's always individuals, and it's usually a smaller amount, that are taking advantage of the other people. And there's no reason why that wouldn't stand to be the case in dealing with interstellar species as well. There's always going to be a bad guy. You've got good, you're probably going to have evil. You've got light, you're going to have some darkness somewhere. So, yeah, I think there are two sides. And there is a bit of a battle over us because we are considered valuable.
Yeah, I find it so interesting, all this denial going on, and even in ancient paintings and ancient texts, so on and so forth. One, I believe Mary is holding little baby Jesus, and in the background in the sky, you see these UFOs or AUPs or whatever you want
Yes.
to call it, having battle within the sky. And there's nothing like that existed back in that day. So it's just very amazing and intriguing to see history recorded in such a way.
I've studied a lot of history through college and just through my own personal study, and looked at a lot of these cultures and the buildings they've constructed and the art that they've made. And it's not just in Christianity, but it's in all these other different groups that existed in the past. Some of them are extinct now. And when you look at it, they very clearly believed, and remember, they wrote exactly what they thought they saw. Whether it made sense or not, they did their best to put it into art. And so looking at that, it becomes very clear to me that there were other things out there. Excuse me. So my wife behind me and I, again, I'm waiting on the immigration process to get her here. I was living in Asia, living in the Philippines with her for the past few years. And I would finish my missions in Iraq or Afghanistan. I would get a 2-month break, come home, and we would literally jump on planes and just go fly anywhere in Asia and go visit these different sites. So in addition to hanging out on the beach, having a good time, we would go find these digs or these archaeological sites and ruins and would study them to try to understand what was taking place. And it became very clear to me very quickly with the conversations with the locals and their history and their lore through the museums and what I saw in the artwork and the reliefs that were carved into the walls, and some of the artwork done by the Buddhist monks, that there was definitely something going on in our past, in our history, prehistory, whether it was pre-Diluvian or post-flood. There was a lot going on. And for whatever reason, there seems to be an effort by the governments to suppress that knowledge. At the end of the day, knowledge is power.
It definitely is. I'm sorry I was quiet for a second. I was just thinking uh, about what you had said and
You're
mulling
probably
over
trying to
that.
digest.
Yeah.
I do
um,
find that when I talk to folks after the shows, they said, yeah, it took me like a week to get over and process all of the information you shared because there is a lot of it. Each one of these different topics has its own rabbit hole that you could write entire college courses on if you really wanted to start going down those rabbit holes.
yes, you could go very deep into it, but it's very intriguing. So what are some other like history or artifacts or whatnot that you have seen personally or that you have discovered through your studies that a lot of people may not know about or that you would think would be interesting to share with our listeners?
My focus has been on Asia, and that's about to shift now that I'm back here in the States, and the wife will be joining me shortly. We'll be doing a lot of work down in Central and South America. But for our time in Asia, Cambodia, Angkor Wat was probably one of the most amazing ones that we went to. You can Google Angkor Wat and see all the photos. But when you're actually there on the ground and you've got VIP passes, so you can do a little bit more than everybody else, you can see amazing things. And I wouldn't be in a rush like a lot of the other tourists because they're like, yeah, I'm going to go visit everything on this complex. And when you do that and you shortchange yourself and not really pay attention to what it is you're looking at and digest it and going all the different parts and locations on that temple ground, you start to miss the picture. So you need to slow down and don't be a tourist. Be a real observer and understand what it is you're looking at and put yourself in the shoes of those individuals 1,000 years ago, 2,000, 3,000 years ago and go, okay, yeah, this makes a little bit more sense now. And look that stuff before you even get there. You need to start doing your studies. Just don't show up and expect to learn everything on the spot. It isn't going to work. You need to do some studying before you go to those locations, and so that you're better prepared to understand what it is you're looking at, and then maybe come up with some ideas you would have never come up with otherwise, or have smarter questions to ask your guides, because these folks have passed a lot of this knowledge on through their families for hundreds, if not thousands of years about what was taking place during those times. And some of this information you're not going to get in the history books. And that's why I place a great value on travel versus having a lot of physical possessions. I would rather waste tens of thousands of dollars on travel than buying a Ferrari or a Porsche or something like that. And in fact, I believe that's probably what I've done. I've spent a lot on travel, but it's worth it because I know so much now. And it's just amazing the things that you see and the cultures that you interact with. But you go in there and you look at the drawings on the walls. And at first somebody's just saying, yeah, they're being artistic. And they're showing you pictures of half naked dancing chicks. And, oh yeah, there's the monkey people. And they just write it off as, storytelling. But when you go to all the different parts of Asia and you see the same things, and they try to tie it into Buddhism, but you realize that, okay, there was clearly some things going on in this region when you start getting into the things like the Monkey King. That's where Sri Lanka and comes into play. But you go to Thailand, Ayutthaya, and you look at those ruins, and you look at some similar ruins, and you see some similar things, the similar vein. Some of the artwork, a temple called Wat Arun. So if you go to Bangkok, across the river on one side, you've got Wat Arun, and it's that pyramidal structure with the 4 points around it, north, south, east, and west. And you look at the artwork that the monks from in the past have put there, and the sculptures and the carvings. Clearly, there was something going on. There were other species in that region at that time that made up that history, that tapestry of history, and how rich and interesting it was that we've lost over time. But these things did happen. I'm convinced of it. But again, until you go there and you look at this for yourself, you can't truly appreciate what these people were trying to convey to us, these people from thousands of years ago. But I highly recommend, if you ever get the opportunity and you go to these vacation spots, even a place like, Cancun or something like that, and you can get those tours to go out to those Mayan ruins, absolutely do it, because it's really going to open up doors in your mind.
Yeah, and it's so amazing the different things that we've found due to satellite technology. I mean, you have these huge
Yes.
cities and things around these certain sites, and nobody had a freaking clue that these different Mayan temples and other things existed right in their backyard. It's just amazing what we're finding due to satellites.
Yes. That would be the remote sensing technology, which I actually had a background in and still do ISR, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance. So I can take my sensor on a regular airplane, and we call a regular sensor, and I can fly over an area, and by using your regular eyes, or we call EO, electro-optical, we see one thing. But once we start shifting through the different spectrums, we can start seeing other details that we couldn't see before. And so I was looking at an old farm one day, and you could see the little circular thing where they used to put the horses on, but all you saw was grass and the rusted shell of that little merry-go-round type device. But then when I started switching my sensors, I could start seeing the trails underneath the grass of where these horses used to walk to and from the barn to this circular merry-go-round thing. And you could even see the indentation or the where the soil was compacted. And so that same type of technology and knowledge of what it is you're actually looking at and deciphering that leads you to these discoveries that, oh yeah, this is what's going on. Same technology. I could fly over an area and I can look at, say, Oklahoma, for example, and I can look at a farmer's big property and I can say, okay, I see all this grass out there. and you're thinking it's all flat and it's all this hard packed soil with grass. But then I can see areas, again, using the sensors when I start flipping through the frequencies and say, hey, that's actually water down there. If you dig in that spot and you go down a foot or two, you're going to find water. And sure enough, there's the water. So again, that same technology, those same principles are applied towards these archaeological sites. So when you're talking like the Mayan ruins, for example, we were aware of that the city was a lot bigger than what we thought it was when those first temples were found. So we knew there was something going on. And so as time, and that maybe the population was somewhere between a couple 100,000 to even 1 million people. And just recently they realized it was like 6 or 7 million people that were living in a mega city. Of course, it begs the question, where do they all go?
Well, it really does, and it makes me wonder about different sites around the world, like near Machu Picchu and such. There's different civilizations that were there. Some seem more advanced than others. Some even like gigantic sort of structures blown to smithereens. And there's different, from what I've heard, like nuclear, uh, like radiation being picked up.
India.
Yeah.
India is classic. Um, so when you read I forgot the name of the books. I've got them some. I think I've got them at my house in the Philippines. But when you start going through those books and you start looking at their history, where these battles with Vishnu and these other princes or gods or deities in their pantheon were having these battles, and they would describe the use of what are obviously nuclear weapons. And so when our scientists and geologists and whatnot would go to these areas to start doing the research to figure out what was going on in these areas, and they realized that they were having, I think it was like iridium and some other substances that were in amounts that were much higher than normal, and the background radiation levels were much higher than normal of what would normally be in that area. And so then they realized when they're starting to look at the geological composition and the radiation levels that, holy crap, nukes were detonated here. They've got no other explanation, but nukes were used, and those tied in with those stories of those battles that took place thousands of years ago, which again goes back into those cultures and those societies that existed that no longer exist. So yeah, that's a thing. If you look at structures such as Petra, places similar to Machu Picchu, and you start looking at how they're constructed and how tall the doorways are and how big the steps are, you go, okay, why would people make steps that are so ridiculously big that they can't even get up, or archways that are so big that, how can you do anything with it? What would be the point of wasting all that energy to create these? And that feeds into the fact that giants existed in the past. Again, that's that Smithsonian working with other organizations around the world to cover up that knowledge. But again, if you look at the lore out there, whether you're looking at the Bible or the other historical documents that were created, they all talk about the existence of giants. It is a thing. It's real. It's not make-believe. So that would explain why we've got these structures that would be more ideally suited for humanoidal creatures that are much taller than we are. And we're not talking maybe 8 feet tall. We're talking 12 feet, 15 feet, 20 feet. I've heard stories of existence of pre-Diluvian giants that were as tall as a mile. Now I'm having a really hard time wrapping my head around that. That's pretty crazy.
Yeah.
I'm not willing to buy off on that yet. And of course, corresponding creatures that would match that size. But we do know that hundreds of millions of years ago, creatures were much bigger. If you ever went to the old Disney back in California, for example, they had a display. I remember, going there as a kid, and there would be this creature of that time frame where our atmosphere was clearly more highly pressurized, pumping more oxygen into the creatures and allowing them to grow bigger and not having those problems that face large creatures today. And so, you saw those oversized dragonflies and those gigantic spiders and the big dinosaur, really big dinosaur type creatures. And so, well, if those things existed, then why couldn't there be taller humans? And in fact, looking at some historical stuff and some writings by some scientists, they're now implying that Adam and Eve were not typically like 5 foot, 6 foot like we are, that they were actually much taller, but that changed as a result of what happened during that antediluvian change after the Great Flood. Obviously, something took place, a cataclysm took place, and it changed the geography, the atmosphere of our planet, which resulted in a change of how we develop as humans, as a species. Again, another rabbit hole.
Well, it definitely is, and it, you talked about Adam and Eve and how they were larger, and it just made me think, Well, if they were giants, then Goliath must have been that mile tall giant. You know,
Well,
super super big.
well, well, Goliath. Okay, so we had Adam and Eve, and they were, some may argue, again, it's still out for debate, and there's still a lot of work that needs to happen,
Hmm.
that they could have been around 15 feet tall, but they would not be there at the time of the flood. They would have already ceased, even though they lived for like 1,000 years or whatever it was they lived, their lifespan. The flood takes place, wipes everything out but Noah, and the idea was, based on God, the scripture, was that seed DNA had been corrupted by the Nephilim, or the fallen angels, tinkering with the DNA of all the creatures. Remember
Hmm.
that discussion we had an hour ago. And so the idea was to clean it all up and reset everything. And so all the pure DNA creatures, such as Noah and his family, and all those creatures were brought onto the ark, whatever the ark was, and then they survived this cataclysm. Cataclysm is over, and then they're allowed to repopulate the earth with genetically pure creatures again. But somehow these Nephilim were still on the planet. And then that's why they still had those different tribes of Goliath. Now, because the atmosphere changed, they can no longer support the much taller creatures, 200 feet tall, 500, 1,000, whatever. So their sizes were significantly shorter than what they were pre-diluvian or before flood. And so the giants then were probably no more than maximum 20, 30 feet tall. In this case, they're implying Goliath was somewhere around, I don't know, somewhere between 8 and 12 feet. But if you look at the average man at that time being somewhere between 5 feet and 6 feet, even just a couple feet more is a big deal.
Hmm.
Whenever the Israelis or the Jewish people transferred from Egypt with Moses back to Israel to take it back or go back to their homeland, or the place God prepared for them, in the writings it makes it very clear biblically that giants existed in those lands. And God was, they sent the scouts out. The scouts came back. They're freaked out, like, hey, there's giants there. So they're telling you there's creatures much taller than us residing in those areas. Palestine and north of that area. I forgot the name of the mountain. I want to say Hernon, where these giants had existed and they had their communities. But eventually they were basically given the order by the big man, hey, you need to go in there and clean those things out, because he knew that they were a perversion and he didn't want them being around and, again, corrupting the DNA of his people when they went in that area. And that's why they were essentially went on the rampage and wiped out all the giants in that area.
And there's even been talk about giants been found over here in the United
Yes.
States. One particular story I remember was a fella out in, I believe it was Death Valley, and he had accidentally somehow fallen through the ground into some sort of tunnel, which seemed extremely large. And he followed this tunnel for quite some time. I'm sure it was a lot cooler than above ground, and then
Yeah.
came upon this very large room with giant skeletons. There was also gold and gold statues and different things that,
Egyptian artifacts.
yeah, exactly, remind you of
Yes. That was the
Egyptian.
Grand Canyon.
Was it?
That was the Grand Canyon. Apparently, this guy got access to the Grand Canyon before it got locked down. And he found a way. He saw the cave opening in the side of one of the canyons. And so obviously, if you're a giant, it's probably easy for you to monkey your way up there and get into this thing. But for a human, it'd be a lot more difficult. So they figured it would be safe up there. Well, he spotted it during his travels through the canyon. And he actually went up and found a way to get up there, get inside, and found all this stuff. Well, that area is now off limits. You can't go there now. I don't think you could even fly an aircraft down in that area because they are trying to seal off that area. And it isn't just that site, but there's many other sites throughout the entire Americas, from north to south, where they have found similar burial chambers where they find these giant creatures, which apparently were treated like royalty. They would have gold and other valuables with them. In addition to that, the more unsavory characteristic was they would find human bones. So whether these were meals that were being offered or sacrifices, or their servants were like in the Egyptian period where they would bury the servants with that person, or even in China, they would do the same thing. So they would find human bones with these creatures for whatever purpose. We're not quite sure yet. I'm sure our guys know that in the Smithsonian. But in addition to finding these things, they also found Egyptian type artifacts and Egyptian writing, which kind of blew everybody's mind. So obviously that indicated that there was definitely a connection between the Egyptians and North America and South America. Now the question is, Did they have the ability to transfer between the two areas very quickly through technology? Or was it so far back that maybe the continents were a lot closer to each other and it wasn't such a long boat ride to get to those locations?
Yeah, and this particular story I was talking about, this guy had grabbed one of the artifacts, brought it up, showed it to his buddy, and then they tried to get back to this place and they could not find it. So I'm wondering, is that the
Yes,
same story?
I'm pretty sure that's the same story.
So interesting.
And it's not just that one. I mean, there's dozens, if not hundreds of stories. All you got to do is just look it up on the internet, or you can go to a local library and look at all the old newspapers using the microfiche. And we're talking really old technology now. I'm dating myself. But you could look at all these articles and you would see article after article after article where giants had been found. Excuse me. All over the U.S. Michigan, Wisconsin, where they talk about the old Vikings up in that area. As a matter of fact, there was a show where the guy went up there looking for the old Vikings in that area. But with that, there was the discussion of the giant creatures that were up there also, tied in with the Nordics. You look at the Indian mounds in, say, Georgia, for example, or the snake mounds. But wherever you see these large mounds, they would find the bones of these giants in those areas. So the U.S. was like, it's like they fled Europe and the Middle East. And they're like, okay, these giants were like, okay, we got to get out of here. These guys are hunting us. We're not safe anymore. So they came to Americas to get away from what was going, the oppression that they were dealing with there. So the Americas was kind of an escape for them. But then they ran across the Indian tribes at one point in time, and the Indians got tired of their crap. And there's lots of stories from the Indian tribes. You can go to talk to Indian tribe, and they will tell you what they hunted these things down because they became a problem. Because some of these giants were actually feeding on the humans. They were eating them. And so the Indians basically had their backs against the wall and said, all right, if this is how you guys want to roll, we're going to play your game too. And they hunted these things down. And there was recently I read a story or saw a story where they actually isolated two of them to a cave, and these giants weren't coming out of the cave, and the Indians weren't going to go in the cave. And so they basically set the cave on fire at the entrance and basically killed the giants inside the cave. But apparently they never went in the cave. Now, interestingly enough, if you look at, I believe, the Indian Hopi tribe, when you look at their history, now we're talking the flood again, an alien species, they've described where the flood was coming. They didn't know it. The alien species, I believe it was reptilian type species and maybe insectoid, but I think it was reptilian type, came out of the cave and said, hey, look, you guys are about to die. Something's coming. A disaster is coming. You need to come with us underground. We will get you to safety or you're going to be wiped out. And so they followed these creatures into the cave, and they said they traversed for weeks getting to the area they needed to go to, which I believe was described as a kind of an underground city, where they survived for a couple years until the mess upstairs got cleared up. And then these creatures brought them back out of the cave complex, which feeds into this thing with all these different cultures around the world, that there is extensive cave complexes underneath the surface of the earth where these creatures or other races or species thrive and survive, while where we do what we do up here. So again, you're seeing that same story repeat itself over and over again. There are things going on. Again, you're talking about an alien species. You're talking about the support of the flood theory. So again, it all ties together.
Yeah, I even have the question about mythology. A lot of these things I believe are true. And I
Yeah.
think it's just so far back in history, or people don't want to really wrap their minds around it. But I do believe that these different things did exist, and now, it's just kind of like lore or whatnot, and not
Right.
thought of as correct or real.
Hundreds of years ago, our scientists believed it was a thing, that these creatures existed, or at least some of them did anyway, and they put stock into it. But over time, the past, say, 300 years, they gravitated away from that, and they created it to be more of a fictitious thing than a literal thing. But in fact, it is literal. So yeah, you look at the Greeks, the Romans, and you start connecting, and not just their culture, but if you go to like the Nordic cultures, you start seeing parallels and descriptions of their gods match those of the Greeks and the Roman gods. You start to see which ones are actually the same person. So that tells me that this deity or demigod or whatever this creature called himself would travel between these different cultures as they were developing and presented himself as such. and then they would worship him or her, and then until that culture died off, and then that individual that referred to himself as a god would go to the next culture and do the same crap. In my study of Satanism and demonology, there was one site which no longer exists. They apparently were told to get off the web because they kind of let the cat out of the bag. And so it was actually started with my Sumerian research as I started to tie these dots together, which gods were which gods in which different cultures, and to make sense of it. And then it started showing, well, the Satanists had said, okay, this particular demon or devil or prince of hell is actually this god in the Greek or the Roman or the Nordic mythos. And they would show the parallels between their demon and these gods of old. And I was like, holy crap, this is all starting to make sense now. But again, within like a year or two, that site got yanked from the internet. So, who knows what happened there. But again, it showed there was a connection, that these things were the same gods, just using different names.
So do you think perhaps that, like you said, they made them leave the internet because they're letting the cat out of the bag? They're giving people this knowledge, and knowledge is power, and they don't want them to have this particular knowledge?
And the question is, was it the Satanists, the head Satanists threatening him to take it down? You were revealing too much? Or was it maybe individuals within our government that basically had the site taken down because of revealing too much? Maybe they weren't ready for that information to get out yet. When I first went through it, I would say I had a little bit of unease at what I was looking at. But if you don't know as much as I do, it could really upset some people, especially if their religious backgrounds are very strong. And it was funny because it was years ago when I said, well, if we wanted to destabilize a strong religion that we would consider a threat in a certain region, would it make sense to make use of the old gods in that region to bring about a revival of the old gods, to restore that culture back to those people and break the chains of that religion that they're currently encumbered by? And there was some merit to that. And I think you're going to find that there is a resurgence around different parts of the world of the old gods. Think Cabin in the Woods.
Right. So, as far as these gods go, are these gods actually angels that bred with humans? That's how Hercules was produced. Like a Nephilim is not human, not angel. It's a mix, but they tend to be stronger, so on and so forth.
So if you go with the theory of all these men of renown, which it says in the Bible, are actually the products of fallen angels breeding with human women, again, in the Bible, and it's also in other texts, and they created their offspring, the men of renown, and these creatures. And so those things are running around. You create that pantheon of deities, and certain deities specialize in certain areas. If you look at the Book of Enoch, and a lot of people don't even know what the Book of Enoch is, and I highly recommend, no matter who you are or what religion you believe in, I highly recommend you read the Book of Enoch, because it starts to paint a more clear picture of all those questions that if you ever went through the Bible as a kid and you were asking, well, what about this and what about that? The Book of Enoch actually clears those questions up. So it kind of baffles me as to why they would not consider that an inspired gospel, or at least a useful gospel of some kind, or writing. But the fact is even they talk about how the different demonic personalities or fallen angels were responsible for certain knowledge and technologies that they passed on to the human species. And so, of course, if they have their own children, then they're going to pass that knowledge on to their children, the more advanced aspects of that knowledge that the humans don't have yet. And so these Nephilim now will subspecialize in these different areas. And so that's how you have that development of different technologies or ideas or thought or literature or art, is because of that knowledge getting passed on through that chain. Some of it good, some of it bad. But that said, so now you've got these personalities running around. And again, if that personality has a long lifespan and it goes to a different area, it may use a different name that would match with that particular culture, or that culture would assign that individual a name, and he'll just take the name on because, look, if they're going to worship me, I don't care what they call me. And which would show or explain why different areas have gods or demigods, or whatever you want to call them, of different names, but their characteristics are identical to that other area or that other culture.
So do you think, just like other giants, these guys were killed off? Are they hiding out somewhere, or did they scurry off in their UFOs or whatnot? What are your thoughts on what
If you look
happened
at
to them?
if you look at the Sumerian writings, they basically said, "We're pissed off at you guys because you're no longer worshiping us." Now, remember, the Sumerian writings are referring to the Anunnaki, and the Anunnaki could be code word for fallen angels and
Hmm.
demons or whatever. In this case, remember, the demon is a disembodied spirit of a Nephilim, because as the Christian scholars would go, if you were a Nephilim, you were not born of God or part of God's creation, so you don't have a soul. So when you die, you still have your spirit, but your spirit can't go meet up with your soul or however that connection takes place and go to heaven. So you're stuck on earth because you're a creature of earth. And so your spirit is now disembodied because your body died. You're now roaming through another, I don't know, frequency dimension, whatever it is, on this earth as part of, I guess you could say, the curse. So now we're getting deeper into the religious aspect of this mess. But I just want to make sure the audience understands that there is a difference between the three groups. So you have your fallen angels. Those are the ones that disobeyed. And then you've got your Nephilim. Those are the offspring of the angel-human mating. And then you've got the demons, which are the disembodied spirits whose Nephilim bodies are destroyed. So I just want to make sure that people understand the difference between the three. So the Sumerian writings basically say that they were upset because the humans were no longer worshiping them. Or they referring to like Baal or Moloch or those other demonic creatures posing as something else, Zeus or Poseidon or Hera or whatever. And then because they were no longer being worshipped or felt they were being worshipped the way they should have been, they were like, okay, we're going to flood the planet or we're going to destroy all of you guys. We're out of here, deuces. And they jump in their spaceships and all take off and go someplace else. And then a planet gets hit by a flood and everybody dies. However, Noah, in the way they wrote the writing, whoever their guy was given the opportunity to escape the flood and survive. Because the question is, well, if everything was wiped out in the flood, how come these things came back, albeit not as big as they were before, and there's not as many of these unusual creatures as there were before, because a lot of that was wiped out in the flood. That's why we don't see the Minotaur, we don't see the Medusas, we don't see the Hydras, all those creatures from before, they're dead now.
Well, I'm still pissed off about the unicorns.
Well, apparently they weren't very nice little creatures after all.
Yeah, a bit snooty, snobbish.
Yes. As a matter of fact, if you dig through the Bible and you look at, they talk about the cockatrice. They talk about creatures like the unicorn. They talk about a lot of different creatures in the Bible. And you're like, what are they talking about? What do we match it up with? Are they talking about a literal different creature that we've never seen before? Or is this just a name applied to a creature that already exists? And so that actually begs a lot of questions.
It really does. But it's very intriguing. I mean, like you said, there's so many different rabbit holes, and you can get really deep down in there with all these different questions and scenarios. But you're thinking they're going to come back someday.
Well, it depends on your perspective. When they come back, are we talking about the aliens, as in the pure sense? If you look at some of the Christian writings, Jesus makes a reference to the fact that he has other flocks that he tends to, which is his way of implying that, hey, you're not the only planet I'm dealing with. I've got people in different parts of the universe that I'm working with. If you look at Judaic writings, I believe it was the Torah or one of the others, where they make mention, I believe the specific number was 18,000 different planets with civilizations on board that God manages altogether. If you look at Islamic writings, they make a reference to the fact that there's a lot more than just a human species out here. And they're looking for it. If I talk to the Islamic folks, they're looking forward to actually meeting with the alien species that exist out in the cosmos. Now, my question is, would God be willing for us to actually meet an alien species that wasn't superior to us technology-wise and culturally, with us, with the fact that we can't even take care of ourselves yet as a species. We're still playing the war game. Why would he allow us to go meet another species that might be like us when all it's going to do is result in more bloodshed and warfare? Because we haven't matured yet enough as a species. Why would he allow that to happen? So wouldn't it make sense for us to get our act together as a species first and then allow us to go meet another species in the hopes that we would be mature enough to be able to interact with them without having the same immature problems we had as a species in our early times? So now we get to, okay, what's coming back? Well, they, whatever they are presumably either coming back, or the alien species that are out there are going to come in greater numbers to assist mankind in a transition of sorts in order to help us and guide us. Now, there's a group of individuals out there that refer to it as ascension. Some may have called it not 5G, but 5D, or the fifth dimension. So our thought process, they refer to vibrations and higher frequencies, to where if you evolve as a human species and more positive, then you go to that higher vibration or that higher dimension, and you become more aware and you gain abilities of whatever those abilities are. So we're presumably we're talking like X-Men type stuff, as bizarre as that may sound, but that's what they're implying. So that's what we could be looking at, according to their side, from a more, I guess you could say, pragmatic, humanistic sense. We're just looking at a regular alien species coming in, providing us with regular technology, helping guide us into learning how not to be jerks to each other, and again, evolve as a species. And then if you look at it from a Christian perspective, they're all just a bunch of demons, and it's going to be the catalyst to that great battle at the end. And not really the end, it's really just a transition, if you understand Scripture properly. And that battle has to take place between the good and the evil before we can mature as a species, because that dark side is what's been dogging our steps the entire time. Now, some will argue, well, God said we are being plagued by these individuals because we turned our back on him. So, okay, if you want to turn your back on me and my teachings that were helping you go on the right path, if you think you can do it on your own and work with these other entities, good luck. I'll be back in a couple thousand years to clean this mess up that you guys will have created in my absence. And hence why we have the chapter of Revelations in the New Testament. So again, there's at least three different ways of looking at this.
Well, and it's very interesting. The Catholic Church came out, talked about aliens, UFOs, how they do exist. Also,
Yes.
recently, they're saying that they're going to retranslate the Bible, which I'm excited about. I'm not Catholic, but I do believe after reading such things, and people get kind of their panties in a bunch, you're talking about religion, but to me, these are scripts written for us to find, and we're still finding new scripts today. But I'm interested to see what is said in these books, because I do believe that some things are added and some things are omitted for man to have control.
Yes.
And so I'm excited to see this purer text, if that is indeed what's going to happen.
I am told that there is supposed to be a major finding, major discovery any day now that will change the way the Catholic Church operates. And that could be what's feeding into this presumed change in the Scripture and how it's written. Now, the key is to, again, find the original texts in the original form, Aramaic or whatever they wrote it in, and have a very open, visible council, not hidden behind closed doors, where everybody sees the process and sees what's going on. And so there has to be complete transparency when they do this. And if they're going to have an argument, they have an argument in front of everybody until there is a consensus, that is a rational consensus as to what that intent of that word really was. And only in that way could we possibly have a true transcription of the Bible from the original languages into English. And there's going to be some challenges inherent with that. But they do this behind closed doors business. It's just going to be another work of artistic liberty. Because if you look at the old scriptures, in the original form, and you go through the translations of like Aramaic or Latin or whatever, and you look at the different Bibles that are out there now, like the King James or the other ones, and there are differences in the verbs being used, even between the Judaic language and or Hebrew and English. The word they'll use is different than what we use in our translation of the Bible. And some of these may seem like very small changes on the surface, but when you're looking at the Bible from a very literal perspective, these can be some very pronounced changes that do have an effect on this whole aliens versus angels versus demons thing.
Yeah, and it's funny, like with, like you said, Christians, but I don't think it's Christians all across the board. But many Christians do believe if you're talking or communicating with ghosts, you're basically talking to demons. But,
Yes.
going back to scriptures, it even says, Jesus said, it is I, Jesus. I am not a ghost. It is me. And so right there, he said ghost. He didn't say demon. If they were all just demons, he'd say demon. But,
Right.
I don't know. I take offense to it because I've dealt with this stuff all my life, and I do believe we're all given our own gifts for a certain reason. And I know when I'm communicating with a spirit or if it's something not so nice. And I do believe all these different things exist, and I believe anything's possible. But it's just intriguing, all the information out there, and we only have a little tiny fraction of it because of the powers that be, basically.
Right. Now, from a religious sense, because man at that time was not considered educated enough, and still by their doctrine, we're not, because of what he knows and we don't know. The warning was given to us because we don't know enough about that. They didn't want us dabbling into that because we wouldn't know what we were communicating with, because many people lack that intelligence or lack that ability to discern what it is they're communicating with. Are you actually dealing with a demon? Are you actually dealing with a human spirit? Because when you look at these folks that deal with the paranormal, as far as I know, there's 4 different things in the spirit realm. You've got your demonic spirits, you've got your passed on human spirits, you've got your nature spirits, and then you've got to refer to as echoes. And I believe you're familiar with all 4, right?
Yeah, echoes are more like residual spirits, like recordings.
Yeah. Yeah, where it keeps doing the same thing over and over again. So it's not a conscious entity. It's just energy that's still stuck in that cycle, almost like a feedback loop.
Mm-hmm.
And people were like, well, what are the natural spirits? Well, those could be what they refer to as like the leprechauns or the gnomes, or in the Philippine lore, they may refer to as the duende. Or in the Thailand, if you go to Thailand, you're going to see these little ornamental houses everywhere. Whether it's inside of a business or inside of the house or out in the yard, each of these little houses has a purpose. And I believe the term the Thai people use is called Bon Pi. Bon, I believe, is house, and Pi is their word for ghost. And so they respect these entities. And so they've got these little homes for them as a sign of respect, not reverence per se or worship, but respect to these creatures. Hey, we know you're there. We get it. And just so you're not upset with us and you curse us in any way, shape, or form, here's a nice place for you to go. And then we'll put offerings. Now, that goes in direct contravention to Christianity. We're like, oh, no, you can't do that. You're worshiping demons again. So, again, there's going to be that battle. But I think at the end of the day, until the big man or whoever comes back and says, okay, guys, you're ready for the next level of knowledge. This is what's really going on. We're not really going to truly understand what's going on. And it's kind of the Chinese proverb of, we're feeling our way across the river or making our way across the river by feeling the stones beneath our feet. And that's what we're currently doing as a species right now, because we don't have that guidance from a very knowledgeable being to help us get across that river.
It's very intriguing. And we're just skimming the surface. Well, on that note, we are going to go to our second musical break. That hour just flew by really fast. So on this break, we have Griff. He's from Toronto, Canada, and he's going to be singing Let Freedom Ring, Zoo, as well as Best Light. You guys don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this musical break.
Freedom!
can still be a slave, you're whipped and loot, that's the truth. Got big houses, nice cars, that's real cute, but it doesn't mean nothing, you ain't free to choose. When I say free to choose, no alarm clock, don't gotta hit the snooze. The world is backwards, I'm so confused. They say freedom of speech, but when you speak your mind, they blow a fuse. Just being honest, common sense and common, it's kind of ironic. My freedom, I recently bought it, now I'm a target if I do the wrong thing or say the wrong thing. Come on, man, let freedom ring. Yeah. United States become divided states. The world is filled with all kinds of shades, and still resegregate. Parents separate from the children, that's not okay. We should be free to laugh and play. Do it now, before you pass away. Fight for what's right, enough for everybody to get a piece of the pie. Brainwash, social media, full of lies. Go to work, pay bills, then you die. Need a breakaway, guns, get rid of the AKs. Our ancestors paved way since the slave days, but we still hurting. Carry that burden. Stop playing victim, beat the system. Love is love, it should be shown. Can't grow unless you leave your comfort zone. This I know, I learned all this from the mentorship. Kids don't know what independent is. Take advantage what your parents did. Go against the grid, you have to. Like going to the bathroom, learn the right songs. Cause of Matthew, liberty like statue. They call now the present, cause it's a gift. It should be cherished, last name fearless, not Harris. All thanks to my parents' parents. Now, love the last name every time that I hear it, cause I know what it represents. Climb the fence, so now I got freedom. Such a beautiful thing. Freedom. Such a wonderful thing. Freedom. Such a beautiful thing. Freedom. Such a wonderful thing.
Go back to my place where I know it's safe.
lock myself in my room. Won't watch the news, cause it is so confused. What can I do if I lose you? All I want you to do right now is leave me soon. All I wanna do. All I want you to do right now is leave me soon for good. Okay. She was a loompa, now her body super duper. Getting a lot of attention she was never used to. Hitting me up like I was Uber. Got a few miles, so I guess she's a cougar. Real winner, never seen her with a loser. Gorilla talk, ooga booga booga. Scuba, tuba, diver, I'm a rider. Getting cider, sweet like cider. Fighter, rider. Neither wants to get it going. Know it, hold it, fold it, blow it. Wait, I'm joking. Cages broken from these beasts from down east. On the streets, it's a zoo. All I want you to do right now is leave me soon. All I wanna do. All I want you to do right now is leave me soon for good. Care if my head ain't right. I'm gonna live my best life. Don't care if my head ain't right. I'm gonna live my best life. Don't care if my head ain't right. Do you and live your best life. Don't care if my head ain't right. Where you from? Who you with? Are you unplugged? Are you equipped? I do my thing, stay legit. In this world, no one's innocent. VIP, get bottles. One snap of my fingertips. See these haters like blah blah blah, blah 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 blah, talking gibberish. I'm gonna live my best life. Don't care if my head ain't right. I'm gonna live my best life. Don't care if my head ain't right. I'm gonna live my best life. Don't care if my head ain't right. Do you and live your best life. Don't care if my head ain't right. Rolling and rolling and rolling SUV. Rolling and rolling and rolling with my homies. Rolling and rolling and rolling SUV. Rolling and rolling and rolling with my homies. I'm going to live my best life. Don't care if my head ain't right. I'm going to live my best life. Do you live your best life? Do you live your best life? Do you live your best life? I'm going to live my best life. Don't care if my head ain't right. I'm going to live my best life. Do you live your best life? Do you live your best life? Do you live your best life? I'm gonna live my best life. Don't care if my head ain't right. I'm gonna live my best life. Don't care if my head ain't right. I'm gonna live my best life. Don't care if my head ain't right. Do you and live your best life. Don't care if my head ain't right.
Welcome back, and thanks so much for joining us tonight on We Are Paradox Media's Late Night in the Rockies. Tonight we're joined by Stephen Edwards. Stephen, welcome back, and thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you again.
So, you had something you wanted to tell us, and this was one of the questions I wanted to ask you, but man, we've been pinging off all kinds of different things. The new space force, you were in the Air Force. What is your knowledge of this new Space Force that's going on?
Okay, well, I was in the Air Force. We had a Space Command, and of course, it seemed that their biggest push was managing the satellites, near Earth objects, the debris in our atmosphere, making sure it wasn't a threat to our satellites, and space weather. Now, knowing what I knew it would only be a matter of time before that mission set would evolve. And so eventually with the process of disclosure, then of course it was a natural evolution that they would be standing up the actual Space Force, U.S. Space Force, as a separate entity, not unlike the Air Force breaking away from the Army post World War II. So I knew that if the Space Force was ever going to become a thing, they would have to break it out. And they did exactly what I thought they would do. Now, there was a lot of people that argued against it, and that's all part of the mindset of empire building. You know, you create your organization within the U.S. military construct. And of course, the idea is to get more money, to get more people, because then it makes you look better as a manager. I controlled this many people. I had this many assets under my control. This was my budget. And so when they get out, then they translate that into, say, working a cush job with Boeing or Lockheed or somebody like that. So in that same vein, that was kind of the same issue with Space Force, because Space Command would be subservient to somebody else somewhere. And so they were always second fiddle when it came to getting the dollars they needed to do their job. So naturally, knowing how militaries work, you would have to make that break and that separation in order for it to be able to do what it needs to do. At the same time, I think the powers that be behind the scenes knew that we already had a space fleet or space assets up there that they've not admitted to. And so it was important for them that, okay, in this process of disclosure, we do need to create that breakout. And then we'll slowly populate Space Force with these new assets. So what I see happening is we've already admitted to the existence of UFOs. It's a thing now. They've admitted the videos of from the F-18 pilots chasing UFOs was real. They admitted that there was a interplanetary craft that they were covered. So all thing we're missing now is an alien body, right? We're also missing assets that would theoretically protect the planet from a incursion. Now, in this case, if you refer back to Werner von Braun, there was a series of threats that we would face that he had talked to his assistant or doctor. I think that he was either working with or she was caring for him. I forgot what the story was. But he basically told her that, okay, first was going to be the Soviet threat. And then it was going to be the terrorist threat. And then it was going to be meteors. And right now we are in the meteor phase. But the idea was to be able to justify these expenditures towards creating these space programs to be able to combat against an alien incursion at some point in time. But right now we are in what's referred to as the meteor phase. And that said, we are in a meteor phase. If you've looked at the internet, and what I was told by the scientists was when you start seeing, and it will be the month of roughly July, when you start seeing them talk more and more about meteors in the media, alternative and mainstream, and you're going to start seeing more shows on TV about meteors, that is your clue that the uptick is about to begin. The other thing I noticed was the movie Greenland. I would advise your viewers to go maybe IMDb or one of the other movie preview sites or YouTube, type in trailer Greenland and watch that trailer. It's about 3 minutes long, and it's pretty impressive how they did it. And the question was, okay, they're warning of a meteor attack. I'm like, no, they're not warning you of a meteor attack. They're telling you when it's going to be, because we noticed was for the American public, they kept shifting the timeline, and we couldn't understand why. Well, they're worried about the COVID and the dollars that it might affect its release in the box office. Well, people don't really care anymore about that. And why did they already release it in the rest of the planet? The rest of the world already got the movie released, so why are they stalling us? And I go, perhaps it's because it's the timing of the movie will coincide just prior to the uptick in the events of the meteors versus the show warning of the meteors itself. And a few of my big brain folks that I work with was like, holy crap, we think you've got a point. So now it remains to be seen. This movie gets released towards the latter part of this month. So I suspect we're going to see something significant either the latter part of this month or maybe starting as early as the month of October, where we're going to see something where the phrase was, people will no longer be able to ignore that there's something going on. That was a phrase given to me by one of the scientists.
So is there any particular reason why there's an upsweep in these meteors? I know we had the Perseids not too long ago
And those
going
are our
on.
typical, and those are the typical ones. You're always going to see those because those are within our system. As we go through our rotation around the sun, at different points along our rotational path, there is going to be a trail of, say, a comet where debris is left behind, and that direction is in that particular constellation, hence the name of that meteor shower. Okay? So in this case, what we're going into is completely different, something we've never seen in quite some time. And what they're saying is we are going into a different part of the galaxy because our solar system travels in a kind of a corkscrew pattern as it goes through the galaxy. And in those different parts of the galaxy, there are their own meteor areas that you could potentially fly through. And we are flying through those now. So it's not that it's something that's already been in our solar system. It's something that our solar system is going into. And so our scientists have seen that. They're just not officially allowed to talk about it because they don't want to freak people out. Because even they're not sure of what's actually going to happen. But we're starting to see indicators of it now. And I'm being told it is going to get worse. And that might justify more dollar expenditures in order to be able to combat that threat. So I was being told, because back in March, everybody thought that they were going to release the existence of some of what I call transatmospheric assets, TAAs. People in the UFO community know those as the TR series of assets. Some say that means tactical reconnaissance, whatever. But for the sake of argument, we have to give it a name. So we just said, okay, the TR series of assets. Your TR3s are your small triangular aircraft, and then you've got your large, giant bat wing one called the TR6, which they believe is what they saw when they had the Stevenson light issue in Texas. They believe, and then the other one in Phoenix, they believe might have been a TR6 that was allowed to fly overhead that area as part of the disclosure process. Speaking of the TR3 series of assets.
Sorry to interrupt, but was that part of the Phoenix Lights?
Yes, I believe that might have been part of the Phoenix Lights. Not positive. I would need to dig back into that particular story, but I believe that was part of it. Because what we're hearing now is a lot of the UFOs that we see are actually ours and not theirs. If it's like a bat wing shape or a triangle shape, a smaller triangle shape, it's usually ours, usually. But they do have assets that are large triangles. But the way they're constructed and where their anti-grav systems are located on the ships are different than the way we do ours. Because remember, their technology is more advanced than ours. Our anti-grav units are typically under the bottom side, where their anti-grav units are on the wing tips, on the edges, facing outward. So that's one of the ways you can tell the difference between ours and theirs. At some point in the future, you may not be able to tell the difference as our technology progresses or they give us more access to technology. So with the TR3, I was always skeptical of the existence of a TR3, but I saw and heard enough things that, okay, I have to at least entertain the idea that such a thing does exist as part of a secret space fleet. So we did a Skywatch in November of last year at Spring Branch. And sure enough, most of the crowd left that evening. And it was just a handful of us, including our audiovisual guy. And so of us four gentlemen had our backs against a tree line to the south. We were looking to the north. The young lady was looking to the south at the tree line towards us. And she goes, "Oh, my God, there it is." And we're like, what? We finally look up behind us. And what we saw was a triangular-looking craft with the lights, the predominant center light. And it was at very low altitude. I would say anywhere between 500 to 1,000 feet, maybe even as high as 2,000 feet. But I don't think it was that high. A little sleepy?
Oh, I don't know. I don't think so. I think it's all that dirt work in Phoenix Sun I've been in. But
So
I'm not sleepy. I think it's a lack of oxygen as well because I have this mic in my face, and so I'm trying not to breathe as I would because I keep hearing my breathing out of my nose.
uh, I had to
So I
break down
don't
to
think
get this thing.
yeah, I think I'm not getting enough oxygen. I have a regular microphone, but coming down to visit my grandpa, then he passed away, and going to his funeral, I didn't have enough space in my little tiny suitcase because I didn't want to pack anything onto the plane. I wanted to do all carry on so I didn't have to go through all the garbage, but now I
Right.
wish I had. So I'm not bored of what you're saying. I think it's a lack of oxygen to my brain.
Okay. I'm just playing with you. You didn't have to go to expression. We're good. We're good.
All
All
right.
right. So the thing is earlier that night, I could hear the Cessnas that were flying around. And these things I could tell were miles away, but I could still hear them from a distance because there were some airfields nearby that they were landing at, the municipals. But this object was much, much closer, like literally overhead, and we couldn't hear even a whisper. So I'm like, son of a bitch, that's it. That's one of the TR series assets. And so everybody was like freaking out. And even our camera guy was so freaked out that he forgot to turn the camera on. And I'm like, I was ready to kill him. But so we lost out on the opportunity to prove that it's a real thing. But I'm like, okay, next time you're not drinking any beer and you're going to have that camera in your hands at all times. But and as a matter of fact, San Antonio is going to be doing another one in November again. But this time we're going to be doing it. It'll be Spring Branch again. So if you're anywhere in San Antonio, we are going to be hosting another Skywatch in the month of November, and it will be at Spring Branch. And apparently at Spring Branch, they have a lot of sightings of the tier 3 assets at that area. So there is a good chance of actually spotting one of these things if they fly by. And they're
That's
looking
awesome.
around.
I'm so interested in doing something like that. Like I've seen different spacecraft. I've always believed there's aliens and UFOs, but I never had any evidence until 2012, and that's when the first two sightings were orb sightings. And from a distance, they looked orange, but I had one about 20 feet from my back door. It looked larger, and as you looked at it, it looked like it had liquid fire flowing through it. It was orange, yellow, and red. Yeah, liquid hot magma. But yeah, plasma rolling through it, and it just
Plasma,
at a slow rate of speed down my fence line, and freaking
Yep.
out. I can't get my camera to work, so I call the family over. My two daughters saw the same thing I did, but the weird thing is my husband, when he saw it, he said he saw the whole orb thing, but inside the orb it looked like a large glowing bat flapping its wings at an unusually slow rate of speed. Second one I saw was a mothership, very large, going. You could see the lights going around like this, and then it would tilt back this way, and you see the lights go this way, and it kept going back and forth, and then at one point it went into like a U shape, and then back to this side, and then back to this side. And then the other one was in Texas, and I had gone to Arkansas to bury my uncle, and we're going through hundreds of miles of these red lights because they have the solar pinwheels or whatnot collecting the energy, and you just see red lights, red lights, and all of a sudden I see these windows lit up off to the right, and I see it going up and down. Although the road is perfectly flat forever, this thing's moving up and down. So I show it to my cousin because he is not a believer. I'm like, Aaron,
Right.
do you see what that is? And he's like, oh yeah, it looks like a little lookout tower. And I'm like, well, do you notice it going up and down? And so he's just looking at it, and it kind of reminded me of the Spy versus Spy hat. Like the lower portion was like a disc shape, and the top
Right.
was kind of like an office for observation or whatnot.
Right.
And I'm looking out the back window. He's looking out the front window, and I get to the point where I can't look anymore, but he's still watching, and he said it just shot off at a rate of speed that he had never seen before, and that was his first UFO, so that was pretty epic. But I can understand how Texas could be like a major site for sightings.
We are. We definitely are. That's why we're typically in the top 3 of the nation when it comes to sightings, typically. There seems to be a downturn lately, and we're not quite sure why, but we suspect that because of all the activity taking place, the unrest in the other parts of the country, believe that the UFO, the observers, remember, they're like tourists, have relocated to these other areas, and that's why these other areas are starting to see an uptick over Texas. But I think when all things are equal, we're always in the top 3. But Texas is still predominantly a hot spot for whatever reason. That said, when it comes to the sightings, if you have a sighting, if you haven't, I would always ask that our viewers and listeners report those sightings to MUFON.com. It's a really easy process. You go to MUFON.com. Up in the upper right tab, if you're looking at a PC, for example, there's going to be like report a sighting or something like that, or file a report. You click on that, and it's a very simple screen. It's got drop downs. You just fill it all out, and you can choose to be anonymous if you want. You can click on anonymous. We've had people use a fake email address. We really would like to be able to get in touch with you. And we're not going to, ask you for anything, and we're not going to reveal your information to anybody. We data mask that stuff. But because we want to be able to call you either by phone or whatever and say, okay, explain to us what you saw, because a lot of times you have more details that you can't or don't feel like putting into the report. And that's where that contact comes in. And then we take that information and then we collate it with all the other documents. So, for example, I had a guy that messaged me through the MUFON San Antonio site the other day, and he goes, hey, this is what we saw. I'm like, okay, great. And I started looking it up, and I found there was a similar sighting at the same exact spot, same circumstances, like 10 years earlier. I said, okay, there's something going on here. And I asked the guy, could you please file it, because this is not the first time this has happened. And he goes, oh, yeah, many other people saw it too. And so he filed it, and we were able to figure out what it was, which is important because a lot of people were left confused as to what they saw that night. In this particular case, we believe it was a drone. But it's better to know what it is than what it's not. Because when we do say, okay, this is a UFO, we want it to be definitive that it really is a UFO. Because we don't want to confuse people, and that's the last thing we need right now. And that's why it's important for when people do see these things, they do file it with MUFON through MUFON.com. Now, in some instances, people don't like to do that for whatever reason. So if they want, they can go to me through my site on YouTube, Team Brave New World. So whether they do it with MUFON or they don't do it with MUFON, they can still file it with me. And so what I ask is, if you want to go my route, it's the YouTube channel is called Team Brave New World. And if you go to any one of the videos in the information section, it'll give you the emails that you can send this information to. tbnw@diplomats.com is one email. MUFON7@protonmail.com is another. But again, just click on the video, look at the information at the bottom. It'll tell you where to send information to. And then I try to do a weekly show if I get enough reports, and to say, hey, this person saw this or this formation or this object at this location. And if they want to be anonymous, then they're completely anonymous. I won't say what their name is. Is everything okay?
I keep seeing something on my camera. I don't know what the hell it is. I'm sorry.
Okay.
That was weird.
But so, yeah, it's important for people to get this information out. If you don't get it out, then we don't have the ammunition we need to pressure our politicians and to help educate the populace that there is something going on. Because clearly there is. I guess what I admitted was in the very beginning of my military career, because I never took the whole thing seriously. Because we had a blackout, and that was the first time anybody ever had said the word UFO to me. It was in San Antonio. I forgot what year it was, around 80, give or take a year, maybe 78. And there was a blackout in San Antonio. And it's the first time I'd ever seen anything like that as a kid. So we're all staying outside our neighborhoods, like all freaked out, like, what's going on? We've never lost power before. And then one of the neighbor kids goes, yeah, the last time this happened, there was a UFO, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, what's a UFO? And he talked about spaceships, aliens. I'm like, okay, whatever. And that was it. But then when I got to my first real base assignment, it was in the Philippines. My female coworker, her and her husband and I became pretty good friends. He worked in air traffic control, and he told me a story one day where he would routinely see objects going across his radar at extremely high rates of speed. I go, are you sure it wasn't the SR-71? He goes, no, I know how fast it goes, and it's faster than what they say it goes, but it's not the SR-71 because this blows it away. And I go, so what kinds of speeds are we talking? He goes, in most cases, it's doing 5,000 miles per hour. Occasionally, I've caught it doing 20,000 miles per hour. And I chalked that away thinking, okay, cool, but it's still not relevant to me yet. Until I started studying the subject, and then I discovered that these things are capable of flying at between 5,000 and 20,000 miles per hour in the atmosphere. Outside of the atmosphere, they can go at much higher speed. So that was that. Back to the secret space fleet. So now we know that there's stuff out there. We know there's a TR3 series, A, B, and C. You may be able to find it. It's hard to type in a word search because of the way the algorithms are with Google and the other sites. So you always get the image. But there are 3 different assets out there now in the TR3 series. So you're going to hear something about a space battleship. I think the word used, battleship, is probably a bit strong. I do expect to see a weaponized and manned platform publicly acknowledged and released as part of a campaign, a PR campaign, and that this ship or ships, there'll be 2 of them, is what I'm being told, will be released in about the next year, probably in response to the uptick in meteor activity, would be my guess. I'm not positive yet. But if you're looking at this obvious uptick in activity, something is eventually going to happen. People are going to go, what are you going to do about it? Oh, we're going to work with Elon Musk and launch these things up in the air with these weapons that we've already had for 20 or 30 years to protect us from the meteor. But never mind the fact that we've already got 6 to 8 of these things already up in orbit right now. The ones that they have not acknowledged. But this would be the way of getting that information out. And then, oh, magically 10 years down the road, oh yeah, we've actually got 10 of them up there right now. But they'll make...
Go ahead.
Oh, but they'll make it, I think they're going to make it obvious in the next year that we do have manned or crewed weaponized space assets, and they're going to launch 2 of them before the end of 2021. I don't like date setting, but that's what I'm getting.
Yeah. Dates rarely work out.
No, yeah, it's really...
Did you notice after the whole COVID outbreak and everybody being on lockdown and they're saying stay in your house, which I don't live directly near anyone, so I'm out in my yard consistently. My 5-year-old pointed out a few UFOs to me that were probably about 10 blocks away. And it was pretty interesting. My kids were down in that exact neighborhood and they saw it a lot closer right above their head. And they said it was 3 really bright, brilliant orbs like you were talking about earlier. And they were kind of doing this like triangle, like dance thingy, like switching places and doing these random movements. To me, because I don't have my glasses and it's at a distance, I just see this brilliant white light flickering. But Lily's just like, Mom, check it out. It's a UFO. Do you find that during this COVID lockdown and such that people are noticing UFOs more because they were at home and really nothing to do? Or do you think there is an upsweep in UFOs being in our atmosphere?
It's a little of both. But what I am seeing is whenever everybody was locked at home, they were spending more times in their yards, being outside in defiance, human spirit, even though they couldn't actually go anywhere. They're bored. They've got nothing to do. So they spend more time bonding as a family. And that usually revolves around barbecues. And that was about the time the weather was starting to get better anyway. So what does everybody do when the weather gets better? They all go outside and have their barbecues and enjoy that time outdoors together as a family. And so as a result, I think that's why our sightings did have an uptick. Now that everybody's starting to return back to work, they're returning back to school, those numbers are starting to go back down again. But when I'm looking at the reports, our reports are getting more interesting. And I've also noticed that there's a lot of people seeing things, but they don't know who to report it to. And that's why I'd like to use venues like this to get the word out. If you see something, say something. And that means don't go to the government. It means go to MUFON and register it with us. Or just go to my channel and just say, hey, this is what I got. Would you mind playing the video for the population to see? And hopefully that will inspire more people to come out and make it known what they saw. Remember, kind of safety in numbers kind of thing.
Right. And I know you were saying earlier, like, people can report to MUFON, but they're afraid to or they don't want to. And there's been several accounts that I've heard over the years of people that aren't exactly doing their jobs correctly. People will report to them and then nobody ever shows up to investigate or nobody ever calls them back. So they feel like they're reporting their information, but nothing's being done. And I'm pretty sure the person that you are, your MUFON is working like a greased engine or whatnot. But these other ones that people know about, I don't know if certain people have retired, but people have had really shoddy experiences with them. So they're kind of not wanting to report it because they feel like perhaps they're recording this information and giving it to somebody else, and they're not finding the help that they're seeking. But I'm grateful that
Right.
you're out there and doing a really good job
I'm
of
trying
it.
to I'm trying to change the way we do business here in San Antonio. And I'm not saying that it was done poorly before, but there's always room for improvement. No matter where I go, there's always room for improvement. And so I've got some ideas that I want to implement in the San Antonio area, and I'm slowly implementing these ideas on able to create teams of individuals. So it's not ideally one guy doing the investigation, it may be two. My boss, Ken, is doing a really good job of getting more investigators. If you've only got a couple guys doing investigations, they don't have the time to do a quality investigation and be able to continue to interact with that individual, or even get that individual the kind of help that they might need if they discover that this person is being visited either by alien entities or by potentially demonic activities, which has happened. So one case in the past where the young lady thought she was having alien visitation when in fact she was having a demonic infestation. And so they basically worked with some pastors in the area to help her cleanse her environment and her psyche of this demonic influence. And she was good for a while, but because of her underlying problems that hadn't been resolved or identified yet, she basically called back, whether she wanted to admit it or not, she basically called that entity back into her life. But before we left her, it was like, stop calling these things. They will do you no good, and you can be back in the same boat again. And well, unfortunately, that appeared to have happened. So we do try to involve spiritual advisors or even religious individuals to help. Now, I've been trying to work with religious personalities, pastors or deacons or priests. And unfortunately, some of them are going to be reticent or reluctant to cooperate because they might fear public perception of their ministry if they get involved in things that are considered bizarre. I'm looking at it from the perspective of, one, you get an opportunity to proselytize or get the word out or educate people into Christianity, so you get to do your job. And two, you're doing a public service by helping that individual defeat and overcome whatever it is that they're actually dealing with from a psychological aspect. And so I'm looking at hard science teams and soft science teams. And I don't want MUFON to be just these guys who become investigators. I want there to be actual scientists, people with science backgrounds. And it could be anybody. It could be a doctor. It could be a psychologist, a psychiatrist, a chemist, a physicist. I'm trying to actively get these people into the organization. So when we go do real science, I've got a reservoir of big brains to draw from to help us do comprehensive, holistic investigations into the phenomena that are out there that makes actual sense. And then we go, okay, folks, public, this is the problem. This is what you guys have known about for hundreds or tens of years. This is what's really going on based on the findings of our team. So if we're looking at Marfa Lights, for example, if a college and I'm not going to disparage the college, I'm not going to say their name, but if they go in, they come back and the report says it's car lights. But when I talk to the locals and I look at the history of this particular phenomena of Marfa, it's clear to me it's not car lights, because the locals say, look, we know it's not UFOs. They're adamant about that. Okay, props to them for admitting it's not UFOs. Some towns might play up the whole UFO thing in order to get more tourism. They're not doing that. They're saying it's a natural phenomena. We just don't know what it is. And so now...
Could it be just paranormal?
What?
Have you encountered a situation like that where it could be just paranormal, neither demon or UFO?
Again, until we do this study on Marfa, we're not going to say or even guess as to what it is. Right now, knowing what I know about the geology of that particular location, I'm going to say it's a geological process and an atmospheric process interacting, creating these orbs that are doing what they do out there. Am I going to be spring-loaded to automatically go to paranormal? No. First, I'm going to look for logical, scientific explanations. If I can't do that, then we are going to have the soft science, and this may be paranormal investigators, say, okay, what do you guys come up with? Because we can't figure this thing out. And that's where they may say, okay, this is what we think it is. But at the same time, we're going to say, well, can you prove it in some way, shape, or form? That could be EMF readings attached to drones. But no, I'm not going to automatically spring load to aliens or paranormal automatically. I'm going to be looking for that scientific explanation first, a rational explanation. If I can't, we eliminate that. Okay, now we go into the other things as possible alternatives. If we've ruled out UFOs, all we got left is paranormal. And if paranormal can't describe it, now we've got a true unknown here. So I'm not going to be spring-loaded to just automatically assume anything. That's how you cause problems. That's how people no longer put legitimacy into your science or your efforts.
Very true.
So with Marfa, the idea is to put a smart team together, have the equipment, do the investigation, come up with what we really believe it is, and not just say it's car lights. Because I'm not buying the car light excuse, because did we have cars 300 years ago, 400 years ago when the Indians were living in that area and they saw the same thing? No, we did not. So why are we saying car lights? You're not doing your job as researchers and scientists and investigators. You failed. I'm sorry, but you failed because you're not looking at this whole picture. And so that's why we want to go back again and reinvent the wheel, so to speak, and go, okay, what is really going on here? Next, we want to go out, like I said before, we want to go do the Bigfoot thing. We want to work with the Bigfoot teams and do a real investigation, a real study, and see if we can actually come up with something more concrete by working with them together as a team and share these ideas on what we do as investigators and what they do as investigators, because how they approach things, the scientific standard is still there, but the technology and ideas that they use are different than ours. We combine that and share that information. We become stronger teams in the job that we do. Another one I want to do is called Devil's Den. So there's a park up in northwest Arkansas called Devil's Den. And that's where Terry Lovelace was abducted by his giant triangle spaceship, which, if you read to the end of his book, mind-blowing revelations, and I'm not going to reveal it here, either catch him on his show or read the book. I'm not going to give that away. But I'm like, holy crap, it's a thing. And as a matter of fact, Terry's getting ready to put out another book, and we're going to be doing an interview on my channel and some other venues with Terry, and he's going to go into his second book. Because I told Terry, I said, brother, after I read your book, I realized there's a lot of stuff you didn't tell us. You left a lot of details out, and I know what you left out. Time to talk. And he goes, it'll be in the second book. It's like, all right, I'm holding you to it. And that book is about to come out. So that's something people should be looking forward to, because there's some very important details that people need to be aware of when dealing with the UFO phenomena. And he touches on it in his book. And he goes into the whole Men in Black. He goes into the triangles. He goes into the abduction. He goes into little grays. He goes into secret space fleet. He goes into all that. And it all ties together. And it means something. And I think it's going to resonate with a lot of people in the audience that have had encounters and didn't realize that they had encounters. They just thought it was some weird thing that happened in their childhood, but because of those mental blocks that are put in place, they don't remember it until they read or hear Terry speak, and then they had those aha moments, they had those eurekas. So that's the importance of that. So at the end of the day, we still have to do hard science. We can't do assumptions. Anything else with the secret space fleet? Presumably there is a large asset up there called the Helincotter. A lot of people refer to Admiral Helincotter, who was one of the first guys involved using the Navy dealing with UFO assets. And allegedly he was one of the original members of MJ-12 or Majestic 12. Now there's a lot of theories about what MJ-12 really is and if he was actually part of it. But I think what everybody agrees on is he did have a knowledge of that. And that particular space asset was named after him. Is it true or not? No, I've got no evidence of it, but there's a lot of big brains in the UFO or MUFON community that does believe there is a such asset that exists. And would it surprise me? No, not at all. I do believe we've got the technological capability of creating those things and making those things a reality. To be honest, it's no different than a submarine. Now, there's some uniqueness that's going to be specific to space, such as cosmic ray shielding, radiation shielding, and things like that. But I do believe we've got that technological capability, and we've had it for a long time, and that such an asset does exist. I was given let's call it a discussion. And there was a meteor, or not a meteor, there was a meteor too, but there was a rocket booster that was supposed to hit New York, of a rocket booster that came in prematurely from one of our adversary nations. And somehow it skipped and missed New York, even though it was supposed to hit New York, and it ended up in the Atlantic Ocean, and little bits and pieces of it ended up in maybe Europe.
Wow.
So what they implied is a device was used to do something to the atmosphere, I believe is what they were saying, whether they charged the atmosphere or did something to it to make it more dense or reflective, which allowed that object to skip a little further And it doesn't take a lot to make a big difference in where it actually lands. And so they are able to do whatever magic they did with whatever assets we did in order to get that rocket body, the motor, to continue its path and then reorbit at a different location or enter the atmosphere at a different location than with all that debris raining down on top of New York. And some may argue, we had a discussion on, well, why would they do something so stupid? That would almost be a declaration of war. And the idea was, well, they probably know that we've got those assets. They just wanted to test our capability by doing an oopsie. That would make the most sense in my book as to why they would do something so stupid. And then there was a report in a very similar time frame of a meteor that was supposed to hit at a certain location. And this was a meteor that they were not announcing that was coming in. And this is what I keep telling people. Don't worry about the meteors they tell you about. Ignore those. It's the ones they don't tell you about. In this case, this particular meteor, they never told anybody about. But they used the same or similar asset to cause that meteor to skip off our atmosphere because of the angle that it was going in. They knew that this particular asset would work, and they were able to get it to actually bounce completely off the atmosphere and continue on its path into space. So that tells me that, yes, we do have things out there that can assist an object to carry on its way instead of saying hello to us in a very impactful way.
We're down to almost our last 10 minutes.
Oh, wow.
One of the questions I had was about directed energy weapons, and I know they've been using those a lot lately. I have suspicions about 9/11 and the way that things disintegrated in midair with no collision. Do you think that our government, and this is totally off topic, I guess. I had another question, but this one rerouted in front of the other one. Do you think our government is using this sort of technology on us right now? We have directed energy weapons, and then we also have, it starts with an L, I think, the sound projectors. If you step to the side, you can be okay, but if you try to run away from it, it'll catch up to you. Like, it's just, straight on with these different random noises that they use. Some you can't even hear, but it can cause you to puke and shit your pants. I mean, it's
yes, that's true.
The different things that
those weapons exist.
Yeah,
that exists. And I said, if you need to crowd control and you don't want to actually hurt the people, like truly hurt them, then it would make sense to use a weapon like that. Like, okay, if everybody's got the urge to take a crap, they're not going to be around protesting and holding up signs. They're going to go take a crap. And so that's an easy way to get a crowd dispersed. Make them have cramps, make them feel uncomfortable, make their eyes feel like they're burning in their sockets. But if that means that you're going to save lives, then by all means, go for it. Do it. Do we have that technology? We absolutely do. I was told long ago we had that technology. There's things I've been told through unofficial sources saying that, hey, we have this, but I'm not going to share that information. But let's talk about DO, for example. Well, we just had Secretary Esper admit that DO weapons exist. And so if he's saying our adversaries have it, that means we already had it a long time ago. So yes, that weapon has existed. Would that weapon theoretically have been used in 9/11? That I'm not likely to agree to because of a number of things. One, was our government involved in doing bad things to American public? No. I worked with a lot of people in different government agencies, and the average American working in a government agency would never be party to those types of things. So what does that tell me? That tells me that there's elements within the government that are working for somebody else doing these things. So it isn't the government being the boogeyman. It's people within the government working in concert for somebody else, a different agenda, contrary to the principles of the American Constitution and the American way of life. We, if we're going to tag it, I would say globalists.
Yeah, it's really weird. Like, just the government isn't, privy to these things. Like, anybody can go out and buy a DO or these sound projectile weapons. I've seen them online. I don't know if they work the same. But the other question I had was about NASA and the different things we have going on as far as the race for Mars. And there's different private investors doing all of these different projects to try to advance us into space and get us further out there. Do you think it's a good thing that it's no longer in NASA's hands and now it's in a bunch of different parties' hands, different investors and such? Or do you think it was safer under NASA's control?
We're already on Mars. We're already there.
Yeah.
We're already there.
Yeah. I suspected that too.
It doesn't mean it has to be a robust facility or anything like that. It could be. But knowing what I know about the timeline we should have been on, we should already have an outpost on Mars at the very least. I suspect we've probably got more than just that. Do we have stuff on the moon? Yes, I'm pretty damn sure we've got stuff on the moon. Is there any concrete proof of that? It's starting to come out now. People are just going to have to wait and see. But knowing what I know about technology and what we were supposed to do based on the original timeline, that stuff should already be there. If I can get my hands on a better copy of the timeline, I've got the timeline, one of the original timelines that was put together by the defense organizations as they were cooperating with each other, and which company was responsible for what pieces of technology and when it was supposed to be implemented. I need to find a better copy of that, because when I tried to blow it up tonight to maybe present it, it didn't blow up properly and it's all faded out. So I get even with my boss because I know he's got a better quality that actually I think came from industry. But that said, yeah, we have stuff out there.
And then we have Christopher who called in, and he's popped in a couple of times and said a few things. But Chris, did you have a particular question that you had for Stephen?
Yes. It brought an important point. We have outposts on other planets, don't we, besides Mars?
I believe we do. I'm not positive, but I believe we do.
Now it's come out that they found that the atmosphere of Venus has among the most favorable environments in the solar system.
There was a prediction made long ago by a lady who said that they would find life on Mars, and that life would be in the atmosphere. And if it was not in the atmosphere, they would be underground. But her emphasis was on the atmosphere. And in conjunction with that, we would also discover a new energy source or power source on Venus. Here's what's interesting. There's a character in UFO lore, alien lore, referred to as Valiant Thor. For our listeners and readers out there, I suggest you look up Valiant Thor. Very interesting stories about this cat. But apparently he was visiting us for a 3-year period, working directly with the Pentagon, and his team was giving them guidance on how to do certain things. And I think that might have resulted in some of that work with some of the Nordics, for example, working with our people with the NASA space program. But that said, Valiant Thor said that he actually came from Venus.
See, they said men are from Mars and women are from Venus.
Venus, 30 kilometers and up, actually has a similar environment to our planet.
Right, because you're not in that deeper, denser atmosphere where it's a lot more pressure and a lot more heat. But the higher up you go, just like our atmosphere, same effect, the higher up you go, the more survivable that atmosphere would actually be. So if you've got some sort of energy device or anti-grav technology to maintain a stable altitude, always, with fail-safes, then yeah, that would be entirely possible. Or your alternative would be to be underground.
It's the least hostile planet in the solar system if you factor in upper atmosphere.
Well, I think I read the other day
no other
that
place like it.
In the Venus's atmosphere, they found different particulates of moss and different things like that do show life on Venus.
Yes.
So that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, they found
that's all part of the revelation. That's disclosure.
phosphine.
Yes. So yeah, they're finding organic compounds indicating that there's life. As a matter of fact, I was reviewing some material that back in 73, when our rovers were on Mars, they actually did some tests that revealed that there was, in fact, biological processes taking place on Mars. But that was all suppressed, and they described it as something else because they weren't ready for the American public, or the globe for that matter, to be aware that there was the possibility of life on Mars at that time. So again, as the months and the weeks and the years go by, we're going to start seeing a lot more of this information coming about. I told people a year ago when I did my first disclosure briefing, we are going to be entering a phase now where we start getting drumbeats of information, or a steady drip from the faucet. It's going to keep coming. And it looks like they're doing it like every month now, where there's a new revelation. Planet X is out there. Remember, 10 years ago, they were saying Planet X was no such thing. And now they're saying, yeah, it's a thing, and yeah, it's in this orbit, when they're still not being honest yet. There's a lot more of the whole planet.
It's a super cool brown dwarf.
Yes. So that's a thing. But again, they're getting around to telling us the truth, and they drip feed that truth to us. Venus, there's a lot more coming on Venus. There's a lot more coming for everything out there. But again, they don't want to dump all of it on us at once, or people are their heads are gonna explode.
Yeah. Film it. Just kidding.
Yeah.
But
You're probably gonna see some stuff on TV yeah. But if you look at people in today's society right now, just dealing with COVID, people have changed. In the jobs that I do and the work that I do, I get exposed to dozens, if not hundreds of people a day, just in work alone. And when I'm analyzing their language, their body language, their verbal language, their behavior, I'm not seeing the most positive of trends on how people are behaving. Just seeing how people drive on the streets, they're a lot more aggressive now. You see those people amped up, so aggressive and violent in these different cities. What the hell's going on? So there is a market change, and that would be another topic for another time. But we're running out of time here. But if we ever wanted to go into that, we could. And that may tie into the whole Planet X thing. It may tie into the uptick in the meteors. It may tie into the uptick of earthquakes and volcanoes that are taking place on the planet right now, because that is happening. You can look it up. You'll see it for yourself. You're also going to notice that USGS is actually fudging numbers on their system now. You can watch them constantly downgrade the strength of earthquakes, while the European systems are showing the earthquakes at a higher level. Or they won't even report the existence of an earthquake until somebody calls them out on it, and then, oh, crap, I guess we have to report it now. And bing, there it is in the middle of this guy, like Dutch, in the middle of his presentation while he's ranting about it. I think they do it to troll him, like, oh, Dutch is bitching about it, let's pop it on our website now. And then, of course, you get to watch Dutch lose his mind.
yeah, it's very interesting for sure. Okay, so we are at the end of our time. I wish we had more time. Like, everybody's like, wow, 3 hours, that's too long. It's never enough time for me. But can you tell our listeners where to find you, your YouTube channel, and different sites like that?
All right. So as far as MUFON goes, all you have to do is go to Facebook and type in MUFON San Antonio. And so we're probably one of the very active chapters. We've got a lot going on. We're increasing the amount of things we've got going on. We do have public programs where you don't have to be a member, but we're starting to limit some of that because we're trying to get more people to join. Because remember, the more people who join, the more of a political movement that we can create in order to get our politicians more involved in the process. And that's why it's important for people to join. We are reinventing things. We're providing more opportunities for people to get involved instead of just being spectators. So that's the MUFON aspect. And again, our audience members, please, if you see something, even if you're not sure what it is, go and report it. If it turns out to be an airplane, no big deal, no harm, no foul. If it's a balloon, big deal. But we may get lucky, and one day you may see something, and then it starts to tie into other sightings, and now we've got something. We've got something concrete as far as actual evidence that we can use as we make our presence to the public and even to the politicians. If you want to work with Team Brave New World and my YouTube channel, where I talk about all these crazy subjects we've talked about and more, I discuss the news that mainstream media doesn't like to talk about. I do try to avoid politics as much as I can. Some cases it's inevitable, but that is also on Team Brave New World. People that are willing to submit their unusual sightings will submit them to Brave New World, and I try to do that once a week. I'll go into uncomfortable topics that people may not always want to hear about, such as inbound meteors, volcanoes, and earthquakes and stuff. But I talk about anything that is different. And I try to give warnings. If I know something is coming, I try to give warnings. I was working through a channel called Informed Info, and the guy will tell you the things I warned about almost all came true, exactly as I said they would. And Chris